Good morning. This is the March 9th, 2021 meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners. Today, before we begin, I would just like to share that we seem to be moving from a county and state where people are tired and frustrated and sick and exhausted of the pandemic and its limitations, where we are now moving as a county pretty quickly. Lane County, as you recall, only a week or so ago, moved from the extreme risk category where we had been for quite some time to the high risk category, which enabled many restaurants and gyms and businesses and churches and events to begin safely reopening. And today we learned that thanks to the behavior of all of our communities and an unbelievably disciplined and dedicated public health department and staff and volunteers and interns and National Guard persons and hospitals and now pharmacy partners, we have moved it down yet another risk level to moderate. So on behalf of all of us, good job, Lane County, yet we still have to continue to follow all public health protocols and keep our eye on the prize. I'd like to also mention before we begin that over 50 groups weighed in on attempting to persuade a fairly well-known airline, Southwest Airlines, to come to the Springfield Eugene Airport as a new hub for flights. And we learned yesterday that we were successful and expect service to begin this summer. This is huge. What is also huge, in my mind at least, is that we did not offer any subsidies, no incentives, rather an intelligent and committed partner with a hand stretched out in partnership, welcoming them to our community. In my humble opinion, this is how economic development ought to be done, where you don't give away the farm, you don't lose tax revenues, but you do welcome people and try to help them have a successful business. So as we're still in a pandemic and we still must follow public health protocols, this is also a day of Thanksgiving, a day we are allowed to feel hope and excitement about the growth of opportunities and building back better right here in Lane County and our wonderful communities. And having hopefully shared a bit of positivity, let's begin our meeting. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? Seeing none, item number 2, is there emergency business? Seeing none, we're at the public comments point of our meeting. With this virtual format, some housekeeping to the public watching. You're currently registered in this meeting as attendees. Attendees are webinar participants who are audience members viewing the meeting. Your microphone and webcam are automatically muted as attendees. There will be a time now when we're going to open for public comment. At that time, if you wish to participate, I will ask you to raise your virtual hand to be recognized. You should see a hand icon on the device you are using, or to watch the meeting, press once to raise your hand. When public comment begins, Diana will call your names. When your name is called, you'll be unmuted and given 3 minutes to make your public comment. When your 3 minutes are up, you'll be returned to muted status and the next name will be called, and you can continue to watch. Obviously, the intent here is that everyone wishing to make a public comment can, and if there are too many people who wish to, we'll just deal with that when the time comes. Diana, are there any persons wishing to make comment at this time?
Thank you, Chair Bernie. At this time, no, we do not have any people signed up for public comment for today's meeting, so I will turn the meeting back over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to hear that, but thank you. We're now at item 4, with or without public comment. This is an opportunity for commissioners to respond or to make their own comments. Do any commissioners have anything that they would like to say at this time. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair. I have two comments. I want to echo your appreciation of community and our improvement in our rates. But I also want to acknowledge yesterday was International Women's Day. This is Women's History Month. And this pandemic has very much gendered impacts and outcomes. There are some recent studies showing as many as 1 in 4 women leaving the workforce in the course of this last year directly related to the pandemic because of the impossibility of juggling kids at home and remaining in the workplace. And this will have some really dire economic impacts on our local community and nationally for years to come. So I'm very much looking forward as we move into a COVID recovery conversation, talking specifically about the needs of women in our community and the impacts of this epidemic, this pandemic has had on them. The other thing that I would like to raise is we have all, as a board, received numerous messages and emails from our community on the topic of a voter's pamphlet for the May election in 2021. And so I have some comments about that, which I will reserve for later on our agenda on item 9B with assignments, when I will have some comment to make about that and a request of the board moving forward on this topic. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for pointing out International Women's Day and some of the unequal impacts the pandemic is having. Commissioner Buck, did I see your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted to share that I've been, as probably many of you have been on the NACO conference calls. We normally would have a conference this week, and last year at this time we were in DC at NACO conference, and yesterday was the conference for the Transportation and Economic Development Committee, and we did pass 2 interim resolutions. The first one was a proposed interim resolution directing the U.S. Department of Transportation to reinstate the local labor hiring preference pilot program. It passed. And the proposed interim resolution supporting local preference programs on federally funded transportation and infrastructure projects. And that passed as well. So just wanted to share that with everyone. In addition to that, I wanted to change subjects a little bit and just express to the board how much I feel that we need to deeply look into how we can lower permit fees for those that are rebuilding up the McKenzie. They're struggling and people are trying to determine whether they even will rebuild. And we do have challenges in how that department is funded, clearly, but I'm hoping that we as a board can come together with staff and find some way in which we can reduce those permit fees for folks who are really wanting to rebuild, but are questioning whether they can afford to rebuild. And lastly, I wanted to express my extreme gratitude to Senators Wyden and Merkley for supporting this next coronavirus package that is coming out. We know it's back in the House and it's not a done deal yet, but they did an excellent job with trying to shepherd this package through that carries a lot of influence to local municipalities, including counties, who will have some significant funding coming our way that is so desperately needed. And thanks our Representative Peter Fazio in the House for supporting it as well. I hope to see it signed by the President very soon and to see counties and cities get some much needed relief. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think we all echo many of your comments. Was there another commissioner that wanted to speak? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. And thank you for the previous comments by the other 2 commissioners. I'm going to continue on your initial start of this meeting with notes of optimism and success. We all like to catch people doing things right. And on Saturday, I caught a lot of people doing a lot of things right. I attended the, and Mr. Mokrajski, I'm going to direct this to you because you are the head of our staff and you're the one who I have the closest directive responsibility toward. I spent a part of the day at the at Lane County Event Center at our mass vaccination clinic, and I was able to watch professionals, volunteers, and staff performing in such an active concert. It was remarkable, not only to me, but to the people who are driving through and receiving their shots. I watched in depth Lane 2 as it performed its duties, and it was such a team effort. There were 5 people in the lane at the vaccination site, but upstream from that, there were 4 different people directing traffic toward the lanes. Once people got to the vaccination site, the vaccination itself took less than 3 minutes, and people moved through into the waiting area for observation. Now, everybody that I talked to has high regard for the work that Lane County is doing. Whatever vaccination site, I talked to people who went to do the vaccination site in Florence at the event center in Florence, which is indoor. People get out of their cars and queue up inside. And then people who went to LCC, also people who went to the event center, Lane County Event Center, and also people who went to pharmacies and other places that were vaccinating smaller numbers of people. The sense of relief that people are feeling upon receiving their vaccination is tangible, and it's universal. So, Mr. Mokrajski, I want you to pass along to staff and also the volunteers, not the least of which was the person who was the chief of the Lane 2, which is the one that I observed the closest, in the work that they're doing. Now, the chief of Lane 2 was a nurse practitioner whose name I think you know, Steve. It was Liz Mokrajski. I think it's okay to say that. And Liz wasn't the only one doing perfect work. The entire organization was functioning perfectly. So thank you very much for the confidence that the leadership that you provide to staff and that staff provides on their own. It just spreads throughout the entire county. So thank you, staff, for the work that you did this weekend and the ongoing work.
Thank you, Commissioner. What was that last name again?
It's hard to pronounce. I can only do it once.
Is there any other commissioner that would like to make a comment at this time? I would just like, if I may, to follow up on what Vice Chair Farr said. I won't mention the gentleman's name, but I was picking up food to go last week, and a very articulate young person gave me the food at the restaurant, and we started talking. And this was one of 3 jobs that he had. He also worked for Lane County Behavioral Health, and he also was a National Guardsman. And he didn't know who I was, and we just started talking, and I asked him questions. And what do you do for Lane County? Well, I'm a COVID case tracker. Oh, really? And how does that work? And he explained to me, and I said, so, once the county helps isolate people, are they on their own? And he said, oh, no, sir. And he started explaining to me all of the support as it relates to food, medical, what have you, that he follows them with. And, it was so gratifying. And of course, I had to text Karen Gaffney and give her his name and congratulate her. And truly, if these are the people that are ambassadors of representing this county and assisting those in need, I think we can all just be so gratified. And I just wanted to comment, that's my only comment, that sometimes it really touches the heart as these things go from our policy-making body to, the realities of people's lives out there. This was a young Latinx guy, a resident of Lane County, whose hopes is to work in our behavioral health once his last 4-month tour in the National Guard is over. Okay, thank you for indulging. Are there any other comments from commissioners before we move on? We are now at item 5, and 5A is our monthly holiday farm fire update, and we have with us both Mr. Mokrajski and Mr. McCrae. If you would lead this discussion.
Thank you, Chair. I'll turn it over to Matt McCray, who has been with us now for a number of weeks and doing great work with the residents and residents in McKenzie Valley, as well as our staff here in Lane County and all of our partners as we continue to work to rebuild a multi-year rebuilding effort that will be, as Commissioner Buck alluded to. I'll probably have more to say about the funding aspects of the American Recovery Plan and work we're doing there and how that potentially could impact some of the things that were mentioned about permit fees and other things in terms of rebuilding. But for now, I want to turn it over to Matt to talk us through where we're at and the great work that he's doing.
Great, thanks very much. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Good morning, commissioners. My name is Matt McCray. I'm the Disaster Recovery Manager for Lane County, focused specifically on the Holiday Farm fire. I have about 5 different items that I want to share with you, and then I have a question I want to dig into a little bit. Just to make it easy, I think I'll try and do all the presentation up front and leave time at the end for Q&A, but I'm hopeful that you'll address some of the questions I have at the end within that Q&A. So a brief overview of numbers. We have 170 plus people still sheltered in hotels in the Eugene Springfield area. We do have staff that are working daily to help move those folks into more stable housing or shelter facilities. A couple of great changes that we've had on the housing and sheltering side. You all are probably familiar with the Red Lion Hotel, which was recently purchased and now turned into sheltering, which we will be, in fact, this week we have already started moving wildfire survivors into that facility, which is really remarkable. I have to give a huge shout out to the team at Homes for Good, who purchased this property and made all the administrative tasks happen so quickly, and then just drove as fast as they could to get this facility open as quickly as they could. Yes, applause is definitely warranted, and yeah, big props for that team. Another benchmark that has just been passed is there's a property upriver near Rainbow, which is a likely site for a direct housing mission done by FEMA. So this is a location where RVs and mobile homes could be brought in for 18-month sheltering to allow people who want to live upriver while their homes are being built and want to reconnect with that community, give them a place to be sheltering up the river as opposed to here in the valley. That property was just sold to a new owner who is interested in pursuing the possibility of having this site become a direct housing mission. In fact, I will be meeting with FEMA, that property owner, and the Army Corps of Engineers at noon today to talk about what Lane County can do to make that happen. One other item on infrastructure, communications in terms of internet has largely been restored upriver to those homes that remain in place and are able to accept service. I'm told by both of the service providers upriver that all the service should be restored by the end of this month. I know it's been a long time coming for survivors who are very dependent on that internet service, and I think it will be a great step to have internet restored to all those homes and businesses upriver. A couple items on mental health. You all know this, and I'm just going to remind us all that this is perhaps the most difficult time for survivors who are displaced by the fires. Any novelty and a lot of the adrenaline has already dissipated, and people are now at a point where they just want their lives to go back to normal. And many can see that that is still many months away. The rebuilding process is slow and frustrating. And in addition to that, hazard trees are being removed, which is changing the shape of the landscape upriver. This is the time where folks are most likely to enter into depression, where we see the highest rates of suicide post-disaster. It's something for us to be aware of, and also to be aware that as a government entity, we are one of those places where people feel like they can vent sometimes. And so we sometimes are on the receiving end of frustrations, and it's important for us to give people grace and have some patience with folks who are in a really bad spot. I also want to recognize that I know Commissioner Buck has been on the receiving end of a lot of that, and from my observations, definitely provides that grace and patience that's so essential. But I want to acknowledge Commissioner Buck for the heavy lifting there to support people in this, not only in the administrative part of running the county, but in that emotional work, which is difficult. In terms of mental health services, I do want to highlight that Whitebird has been, I touched on this briefly. I'm just going to hit a few more details this time. Touched on this briefly last month when we spoke. Whitebird has been hired. There are 4 staff people in teams who are mobile and able to move both up into the valley in the fire affected area, but also down here in the Eugene Springfield area to provide service, trauma service, referrals, et cetera, to support people as they're dealing with this really difficult time. And then one last update item I want to share with you is that eWeb is providing incentives. This is on that brief that I provided for you in your packet. They're providing incentives both to help people fund the cost of advanced septic systems so that as people rebuild back, they can rebuild with higher performing septic and keep our water clean. They're also providing an incentive to support people as if people take on additional permit costs to relocate their home back away from the river. eWeb is providing some incentive to help cover the costs of those permits to encourage people to relocate back away from the river if that's an option for them. eWeb also, the board adopted a surcharge on water bills that is specifically dedicated for watershed recovery. It's on average about a $3.50 surcharge per month for the average residential customer, and it will provide several $1 million to support watershed recovery efforts upriver. They felt like this is an important time for ratepayers to step in and put some money on the table as FEMA and the state and others are doing the same. And then the last topic I would like to discuss with you, and this is the one where I'm asking for your feedback specifically, is around measurements. As we go forward, I'd like to provide you with regular updates and metrics that can help you and the community understand how things are changing upriver. Overall, we would like to focus on metrics that are county specific. Not that we won't include other metrics, for example, things that ODOT is doing or funds that are coming from the federal government. But we'd like to focus especially on those things that are county metrics. What are the things that we as a county do that affect the lives of people in the area of recovery? We also like to focus on metrics that are already being counted. Again, not that we can't begin counting new things that aren't already being measured, but it's certainly easier for us to put before people metrics that are already being counted. Some of the examples to suggest for you, the number of people in shelters, as I just provided at the top of this update, but we also might start sharing with you the number of permits pulled for rebuilding in the area, the number of building starts, for example, the amount of federal and state funds that have become available to us or that are being used to support recovery. Those are a few examples. If you have specific ideas of metrics that you would like to see, I'm asking for your thoughts on this particular point. And of course, this particular meeting is not the only opportunity to share with me your thoughts on metrics. If you have thoughts on this or you'd like to chew on this further offline, I'm certainly available to do that. But we'll start bringing metrics to you in the coming months so that we can track progress on recovery. That's all I have for an update. I'm available for questions.
Do commissioners have any questions for Mr. McCray or comments? Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. McCray. That was a great presentation, really helpful. Really hopeful, but also continuing to be really heartbreaking. And I especially appreciate you bringing in the element of the grief and loss and the mental health impacts. I have a couple of one just quick question, and you may not know the answer, and I should be reaching out directly to eWeb administration about this, but I wonder if there's an opportunity for eWeb clients to voluntarily increase the amount from that $350 cost share. Because I think just knowing what a giving community we have and how much everyone was impacted and how this tragic natural disaster has really pointed out how many of us are at risk of a similar thing. It was sort of happenstance that it was in the specific geographic area of the county that it was. There's nothing, so many of us are concerned about the future, and I think it could be a real opportunity to ask community to step up and help in that way. The other I wanted to ask about in the metrics, and I appreciate you saying this isn't the only opportunity, but the two things that came to mind is I appreciate that the metrics you name are successes and what we're doing and delivering, but I think for me it would also be helpful to hear what the metrics of what kinds of requests we're getting, and then the gap between the requests we're getting and what we're able to meet is a really important place for us, I think, to consider service needs. And finally, I wonder if you could share what, if any, communications you've had with the school district in the affected area, because I would imagine that's a really ripe and ready community to hear from about what useful metrics and what's being experienced by folks in the communities could be. Thank you very much.
Great questions. Thank you, Commissioner Trieger. In terms of your first question about eWeb customers voluntarily increasing their contribution, that's a great question. I'm happy to go to eWeb with that, or you can if you'd like. I'm happy. How about I'll ask them that question and follow up with you and provide you the answer that I get from them. Does that work? Okay.
That does. And if you opt to ask, if you opt to ask it via an email, you're also welcome to copy me on that message and let them know that's, just loop me, whatever works for you. But yes, thank you.
Great. I'll do that. Thank you. And in terms of metrics, yes, good point about the services being requested. That's an important thing for us to track in the gap there. Thank you for those suggestions. I have not talked with the school district about metrics specifically, though I am in conversation with them about establishing a remote office for me and other county staff to be working from the school campus. So I will be in close proximity with them soon if everything works according to plan. But even without that, that's a great idea to reach out to the school district. I had not done that yet. Thanks for the suggestion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. Matt, you are doing such a wonderful job in your new position. I'm so happy to see all the work that's being done with the community, and applaud you for all the work that you've done so far and to come. One of the metrics I would like to see, in addition to just the stats and numbers, is what are the legislative bills that are funneling through related to wildfire and their status of those bills. There's a handful that are pertinent. There's not, hundreds or anything like that, but there are some good pertinent ones that will affect the Holiday Farm Fire area specifically. That would be nice to follow throughout the legislative session. And we talk regularly, so I may come up with more as we go along.
Great, thank you. Good suggestion. I will say, and thank you for the kind words. I will say I have joined a remarkable team of people here at Lane County. It's absolutely a privilege to step into this job and see so many people who are working on recovery, diligently have been really going above and beyond. So I find myself in great company.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck, was there anything else? I'm sorry. No. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie, and Matt, thanks for the presentation. A number of things to say. I do have a quick question regarding travel up the Mackenzie. Many people, myself included, have specifically avoided travel up the Mackenzie in order to stay out of the way of salvage logging, for instance, or people trying to recover their property. Can you give a brief update on public travel up there? What is okay? What should we still avoid? And what is the what's the general behavior of people who do travel up there?
Yeah, great question.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr. There is extensive hazard tree removal going on now, and ODOT is also starting into debris removal on private properties. So in short, there will continue to be large trucks and heavy equipment up there well into the summer. We should expect delays on that roadway of up to an hour. ODOT has rules that delays can't be more than 20 minutes or so, but it's not uncommon that you'll run into 3 different areas of construction or delayed traffic. So if you're traveling upriver, count on the possibility of an extra hour of travel time to get beyond Blue River. I would say, from what I've observed, it's certainly safe for people to travel up there. I think avoiding unnecessary trips up there, as you have, Commissioner Farr, is a really great move to the extent that people can move their trips to Highway 58 and get up to the Cascades that way. I think that's a good move. There's a tremendous amount of truck travel in there. There's going to be an increasing amount of construction as we move into the summer. I will say that, as I understand it, the community upriver is debating right now whether or not they want to do a really heavy promotion to try and increase tourism over the summer. That conversation is happening, and it's not clear to them that that's something that they want to do. So your question, I think, is well timed, and I hopefully next month we'll have a better conclusion on that particular piece. My observation is that the travel up there has been fairly safe. Folks are being respectful. It is a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit through the entire affected zone right now. Not everybody's observing that, but certainly speeds are down from what they have been in the past. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does, and another subset of that question is truck travel. It's a very heavily traveled freight route. Has truck travel returned close to normal, or are we still experiencing a buildup of that?
So there's a huge amount of truck travel associated with the debris removal and the tree removal and the logging, the salvage logging that's going on upriver. There is currently an ODOT restriction on through travel for commercial freight vehicles. However, that's not yet being enforced. We're in the process of working with the ODOT to get both ends of that corridor signed so that both state law enforcement and county officials can enforce that restriction, but it's not being enforced currently.
Thank you, and I'll wait to hear updates on that, because once again, that is a heavily traveled freight route during normal times, what have been in the past normal times. Secondly, Matt, I'm going to talk about measurements and metrics and the importance of it. I know you know the importance of measuring both progress and regress, as we're doing better and as we're doing worse, and making sure that we track the points along the way. Each one of us brings experience from our past lives, whether it be in work or social environments, whatever it may be. We bring, some of us, deep experience in certain areas. And for me, measurement has been one of the keys to what I've done throughout my professional, my private life. For instance, with the tiny little hardware store, we measured every single thing in order to become the largest home improvement center in America. So if you measure things, you get a lot of positive results from it. First off, you know how well you're doing. Second off, you're able to identify what were potential mistakes and redirect the future efforts. And third, you get people interested in helping you move forward because they can see their own personal contribution into moving forward. And being able to report measurements, being able to report progress is absolutely essential. And I trust that you're measuring pretty much everything that you possibly can based on your experience and based on the experience of the people in our government staff. And the other part of measuring is identifying things that perhaps you didn't know you could measure that can help you move forward. Doing things differently. as we measure doing the things that we've always done the same or close to the same, then it's we can track that. But then measuring things that we've done that we are looking at differently. For instance, Commissioner Buck just mentioned tracking bills in the legislature. I don't always think of that as measurement, but however, tracking the progress of the bills. You know, there's a bill progress tracker, and it's important that we know where things are going so that Commissioner Buck, in her expert manner, can address the legislature to help guide them in their future efforts. For me, one of the most important things is something that we've always talked about, that I've always drilled home, is how are we being innovative in allowing housing in the Mackenzie area? And it's a great opportunity for us to do things that we've never done before, both in emergency, which we're hopefully more or less past in the Mackenzie, in the Holiday Farm fire area, through transitional and into permanent housing. Transitional is a big key, and I want to track personally transitional housing. How are we allowing people to move onto their property in transitional housing until permanent housing can be replaced on their property? And in doing that, we need to take a look at what innovative forms of housing have we begun to allow. For instance, portable tiny homes, something we've talked about quite a bit. And I'd like to hear numbers on how many people are able to move a transitional home onto their existing property, their former house, and until they and live in it. Who knows how long until they can get their permanent residence built. I have a couple more of the metrics to talk about. I won't waste everybody's time right now, but I'll forward those to you through Mr. Mokrahajski. And you know, trust that you are measuring everything that you can measure, Matt, because that is how we get better. And that's how we get everybody understanding how good of a job you are actually doing. And also identifying where we're not doing as good a job and where we can do better. So perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr. And the only thing I appreciate that it's super helpful thinking. We are certainly measuring a lot of things, and I'm not sure that all of them for you or for the public are necessarily useful. So I'm especially interested in the things that you feel like would be useful to put out publicly. Not that any of it's being hidden. I just don't want to drown all the most juicy metrics in a list of 100 that aren't relevant, right? So we're certainly tracking a whole number of things. And I'm curious in what's most ripe for you.
Thank you. And a part of it is encouraging behavior in areas outside of the Holiday Farm recovery area. That if we're doing things in an innovative fashion, that we can do it in other parts of the county, and in fact, in other parts of the state and the nation. Doing things that we've never done before regarding housing, getting people into housing in ways we've never gotten people into housing before.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Matt, for the term juicy metrics. And I know Commissioner Bozovich has been patiently waiting, sir.
Thank you. I am very interested in the metrics around building permits, particularly building permits versus number of structures, you know, so that we can kind of track a percentage of recovery in that range, because just building permits alone doesn't mean a whole lot unless you understand how many dwellings were lost. So if we have, you know, 10 building permits issued against 400 dwellings, that's not very much progress. If we have, you know, 200, that's a big difference. But that figure by itself, I would also be interested in tracking, if possible, and I don't know how easy this is to do, planning applications, because you know, those floodplain verifications, legal lot verifications, and everything that happens long before you can even put a building permit in, and how many have been submitted and how many have actually completed process would be an interesting aspect to track, because that, you know, you can't even get your building permit in for review until you've completed some of those other processes. And I'm just kind of curious, you know, whether that has some ability to track, because that, for me, the real thing we have control over as the county is that permitting process and the ability to help people get through that process. And I very much support Commissioner Buck's call to try and deal with the permit costs in some manner in and we'll have to further discussions probably about that under agenda team request and a few other items, because I have a few ideas. But that to me is the biggest thing for us to track, is that recovery of getting people back into dwellings and structures and getting them rebuilt. It is going to be probably the most important metric, because it's the one that's lagged the most from other fires in other areas. We heard from the folks down in California that 5 years later, they barely had any reconstruction going on. I don't want to be there. So I'd like to keep track of that and see what we can do to expedite that and make that work.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Rosevich. Yes, I agree. The planning application submitted and completed is going to be an important thing for us to both to track and to report to you all on a regular basis. Great point. Thank you. And putting it alongside the dwellings lost, so we have some reference point. Great suggestion.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. Matt, it's not often that we get this into the weeds. It's good to do, but I wanted to make a couple of points, if I might. You started by mentioning that it's important that this is a time where people's mental health or just their positive attitude can get eroded, right, after just dealing with this reality. And you mentioned that hearing people out and validating their experiences and trying to bring some sense of humanity, whether it's into broken systems or in this case, into just the frustration of rebuilding. And I would just like to issue a call out to Commissioner Buck in that regard. I know that this is not the issue that Commissioner Buck ran on. This was not anything that was foreseen by any of us, as we want to do our best to make this county as wonderful as possible for all residents. But I have observed her, I filled in for her a couple of times, but really I've observed the level of dedication, the sheer volume of hours and meetings and issues that are attendant to this. And Commissioner, for what it's worth, I've observed this, and I just really want to thank you for staying with this, because it's your district. This has had by far the significant impact in. So thank you, Commissioner. I also want to ask you a question. Do you happen to know the harvesting of hazard trees? I don't live too far away from 126, and I see what you're talking about. The harvesting, the movement of traffic, is that in any way going to slow down the anticipated time frame of the Bureau and Land Management's issued cut for Seneca and the Thurston Hills? Does one have anything to do with the other?
Wow, thank you, Commissioner Berney, Chair Berney. I don't know. That's a great question. I did speak with somebody from BLM yesterday about hazard tree removal, and his explanation in short was that everybody who was working on recovery, hazard tree removal, et cetera, was also doing the work that was on their plate in advance. So he suggested that there's not a lot that's just getting dropped, but that people are just taking on additional responsibilities. So based on that, I would guess that it may continue on, but I can get you the answer for that.
Yes, there's no rush. Rather than a guess, if in your next monthly report, could you let us know?
Yeah, sure.
And many of my neighbors would. And then finally, you opened up the box in terms of asking us about measurements. So here's my 2 cents. Things you measure tend to improve. Things you don't measure tend not to. We've seen the good, the bad, and ugly of that in public education, but that's a whole other issue. While I agree with all of the comments made, I'm more interested in the immeasurable. I am more interested in how we deal with, and you can't quantify human suffering, lack of hope, lack of patience, so frustrated that you go to self-medication as a rational option just to deal with the upheaval of your life. And I just want to suggest that for what it's worth, about 25 years ago, when I was trying to get at some of those things behind the data that drive the data, but the data doesn't really, it's just kind of hovering around. There's a gentleman in our community that in some ways has been a real rabble rouser, but in others has so much insight into how you can get your hands on that. And his name is Dennis Sandow, and he's a local resident. And this is his background, is this kind of measurement. And I would encourage you to touch base with him to see if he couldn't give you one or two key, insightful ways to try and measure the immeasurable. Thank you. And thank you, commissioners. Commissioner Bozovich, your idea at one point, and Mr. Mokrahajski saw it through, and the United Way agreed, was to develop a fund specifically, as I recall, for Commissioner Buck's point about trying to ease the cost of permit and building fees. Do we have any status on that, or is that something that we should discuss later?
I think we probably should discuss that later.
Okay.
Unless
Steve?
Mr. Mokrahajski has something to add.
Because I know we're all concerned with the same issue, that's all. So any updates, Steve? And if not, we'll move on.
Not a significant update, I would say. I believe I have a meeting with the United Way Executive Director next week to talk about that. We're working on an MOU with them on establishing, so we have that relationship and the kind of the foundational pieces established. I'm not aware that there's been any actual fundraising that has occurred from that, but that can happen. So yeah, more to come on that.
Okay, thank you. I just felt it directly addressed the point Commissioner Buck made when we started this discussion. Matt, thank you so much. Any other words for us before we move on?
No, thank you all for the time.
Thank you, sir. I believe we are now on item 5B, COVID-19 response and recovery. We have Mr. Mokrahajski and Mr. Adams, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I have a few things I want to share before I turn over to Mr. Adams. In this transition between Mr. McCray and Mr. Adams, I want to just point out one of the things that Matt was talking about, how much he's enjoying working for the county. And of course, Mr. McCray and Mr. Adams are both new to the organization. I want to just point out that they both are in leadership roles that represent a lot of great work that's happening from a lot of people in both of these response and recovery efforts that are happening. But they also represent, I think, the energy in our organization and our ability to recruit and retain talent. It's one of the things that I myself am so energized by is continuing to bring in new and really talented people into the organization, continuing to empower and lift up and promote people that are within this organization. There's just a really great, with all the challenges, right? And with all of the endless number of hours and stresses that people are dealing with in this organization through the various crises we've been managing for the past year, there's an energy that pervades. You see this when you go to the vax clinics, you see it when you're in meetings with our various teams working on these things. So I just wanted to use this opportunity to kind of point out these two newer people to our organization that really are representative, I think, of a lot of the positive energy and positive work that's happening in so many different circles. I also want to start with a story here because we're going to get into some details. And appreciate Commissioner Chair Burney for starting us off on a positive note. There is still a lot to be stressed and sad and frustrated and concerned about in our community and in our world. But there's also, we need to celebrate here a little bit, right? Like this has been a period of downness. And so I appreciate you starting the meeting off with some really uplifting news. I want to share a story with you that I think articulates, these are going to be words from a few other people first. we've heard criticism and concern about the, particularly from our seniors who are just like frustrated and fearful about the need to get vaccinated. And so I want to share this story that kind of walks through some of that fear and concern in a nice way. So bear with me, but this is from an individual that said we could share this story. They said, my mother, Elaine, who is 92, and her friend Dell, who is 95, both pre-registered with the county to get vaccinated. Both got acknowledgments via email. Elaine, the 92-year-old mother, got her appointment notice right away, but Dell, the 95-year-old, hadn't heard anything yet. They tried calling HHS and staff was looking into it, but they hadn't heard back. So they also tried to work through the VA because Dell is a World War II veteran. And local pharmacies, but they couldn't get an appointment for Dell. So Elaine had gone and gotten her vaccine at the fairgrounds and gotten her second shot this last weekend. She wanted to take Dell, hoping that they could get Dell a vaccine because Dell hadn't yet got his first. We couldn't get him a second dose, right? Because you have to get your first through that and then get your second. But they told that story about Dell, and they brought a hard copy of the letter that Dell got confirming his registration, that he was pre-registered, but he didn't get an appointment, right? And that's where the frustration is. Pre-registered, someone else got an appointment. I didn't get my appointment. What do we do there? So they couldn't find him in the database, but they sent him over to the waiting area and said, we'll help you there. So that's when this one of our people, Dana, went over to help and said, we can't get you a shot here at the fairgrounds because it's a second dose booster group. But we have an opening at LCC this week. And so, so it says, but then this person, Dana, went above and beyond to make sure we could get Dell an appointment this last weekend. She called Kachina, our HNHS assistant director, who was up at LCC, and Kachina said, we'll make it happen. So they got Elaine's second shot at the fairgrounds, waited 15 minutes, which is the protocol, drove up to LCC that same day, actually. And this person says, I was expecting to have to go through the entire explanation again, but as soon as we started the story to the first person we talked to, she interrupted and said, oh, you're Dell. And she was actually pretty excited to see us. And she said, I won the Dell sweepstakes. From that point on, everything went smoothly. We got a vaccination card for Dell, got in line, and he got his first shot. So this last piece is the one that I think is really important to recap. This person says, the entire experience yesterday was very uplifting. We know Health and Human Services in the county is overwhelmed with calls. And even though we appreciated how hard everyone was working, it was very frustrating that we couldn't get a 95-year-old an appointment. But when we got a chance to work face-to-face with the people at the fairgrounds and at LCC, the personal contact made all the difference. We really appreciated how creative, flexible, and determined you all were, and how hard you worked to make sure Dell got his first vaccination. I wanted to read that one because it articulates the frustration that people are feeling, that we, tens of thousands of people have pre-registered, right? The system is inundated. We hundreds of calls per day. We get into our call center. There's it's just overwhelming, the demand. And there's frustration comes with that because you have people like Dell who fall through the cracks, right? And I think to me, what's really important is we're setting systems up. We're doing the same thing. I shared in an email last week that I participated in a call nationally with county administrators from throughout the country last week, and we talked specifically about COVID vaccinations. They all shared the exact same story, that they all have pre-registration systems. They all have mass vax clinics that are set up. They all have staff and volunteers that are doing this work, working countless hours. They all have frustration in the community and a common theme. They have a lack of supply and heavy demand, right? That's the consistent theme across the country, is there's frustration because everyone wants a vaccination, particularly seniors who are vulnerable, want a vaccination. They can't all get access because there isn't enough supply. So this frustration pervades. But they all said to a person, everyone that's going through and has these personal experiences and actually gets to see the process, walks away with an experience of understanding the complexity, the efficiency, and the effectiveness of that process. And so I just want to share that is everything perfect? Absolutely not, because we don't have the supply. We still don't have the supply we need to get everybody vaccinated that wants to get vaccinated today. But as people work through that process, so I'm going to share one more brief comment, and this comes from a local influencer, a business, a family-owned business in the community that posted on social media. Lane County Public Health should receive an award and a gratitude for their contributions to vaccinating our community. I spent the day volunteering at their vaccination clinic and was blown away by the well-oiled machine they have created over the last few weeks. It was organized, efficient, and absolutely remarkable. A few tears, tons of smiles, and plenty of happy dances with grateful vaccine recipients. Lane County Public Health, way to go! Exclamation point. That's from a local family-owned business that volunteered. We have a rather lengthy volunteer process. Commissioner Farr, you mentioned my wife, who's a nurse practitioner, signed up to volunteer, and it took a few days. You have to actually study and take a test. We make you work to work for free at Lane County. And we have both medical and non-medical. My wife is a medical volunteer, so she actually was sticking people in arms with vaccine this last weekend. She worked an 8-hour shift, no money, and came home and was beaming, right? She was exhausted, and that's what we hear from all of our volunteers, medical and non-medical. They're just like, oh my gosh, this was the greatest experience. And then what happens is we get inundated with more people that want to volunteer because it's such a great experience to participate. So I want to hammer home this point about this is a community-wide effort. We have incredible staff who are working around the clock. We have incredible volunteers who are giving their time for no pay and their expertise for no pay to do that and loving it. And just partners throughout the community that are doing great work. So I could take the rest of the time here and read stories of these emails that we get.
No, you can't.
At that point. What's that?
I said, no, you can't.
Yes, I understand. But I want to hit that point with you. Commissioner Farr, I think, is showing a picture of the Vax Clinic. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Adams to walk through some of the details. I just we know there's frustration, but as people have that personal experience, I think they understand the complexity and the challenges. I will say the good news is this last weekend, we vaccinated 6,700 people, 4,600 plus new doses, first doses, 2,600 plus booster doses. Next week, we're this week, we're doubling. We have over 15,000 doses. And we're going to continue to see that supply increase over the coming weeks. I want to also say our vaccination numbers per capita continued in Lane County, continue to exceed Marion, Clackamas, and Washington County. We are inching closer and closer to Multnomah County, over 1,700 doses per 10,000 population. So we continue to exceed the comparable counties. And then the last thing I'll say is we are working and plan for Chair Burney to sign a letter today, along with the Benton County Chair and the presidents from the University of Oregon and Oregon State University to some of our state legislators to request a meeting from the governor, a collaborative approach to talk about, yes, we've moved from extreme to high, now to moderate, so really positive there. Keep wearing masks, keeping our distance, and get your vaccine when you are ready to do that. But we also want to talk to the governor about opportunities to really be thoughtful about our healthcare system has not been overwhelmed. And so we want to make sure that our measurements are appropriate for what we set up originally on this. So all of that is in the works. And thanks for indulging me in that overview. Mr. Adams, I'll turn it over to you to walk through some more of the details for the board.
Thank you, Steve and commissioners. Chair Burney, commissioners, good morning. It's a delight to be with you again. I'm unable to show the familiar epi curve this morning. Our data visualization software is down today, but I'm happy to report that over the last 24 hours, we've had 24 new cases reported, bringing us to 10,437 cases. we are showing 90 individuals being tracked in the community currently as infectious. That's an increase of 2 over the last 24 hours. We've had 6 discharges from the hospital. So we have 12 COVID-19 positive patients in hospital at the moment. We have 7 of those in ICU beds. And we've had no new reported deaths in the last 24 hours. We stand at 132. I think it's important to note that we've not had double digits in terms of infectious being tracked since September of 2020. So we have seen certainly a continuing decline in positive cases being detected, and we continue to see very good hospital capacity with respect to both regular hospital beds as well as beds in ICU. So the, let's see. All right, so hopefully you're seeing the risk level metric here. And as Chair Bernie indicated in his opening remarks, today is a movement day. And Wayne County is now clocking in at 92 cases per 100,000 over the last 2-week period that ended 3/6. So that now puts us into the moderate risk category. And for large counties, as well as that combined with a 1.8% positivity rate for tests, well below the 5% threshold. So effective on Monday of this, or Friday of this week, Wayne County will move into moderate risk. And that, of course, has implications for the degree of commercial activity that our restaurants, our gyms, and our other establishments will be able to do, as well as an enhanced capacity for gathering. As many of the commissioners indicated, this is not a time to let down our guard. We need to continue to social distance, mask, and wash hands, all of the very sensible things that we've been doing. But this really is a celebration of what people right across Lane County have been able to achieve.
Do you want to come down here with me for a bit?
I don't know. Excuse me, Steve. Diana, could you mute yourself? Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Of course. Okay. So of course that comes online. Now it's notable, I think, and as Steve indicated in his opening remarks, Chair Bernie is forwarding a letter. So one of the changes that we've seen just within the last several days, I believe late last week, we got an update from the governor's office as to how counties that have stepped down in one level of risk, and then after a 2-week period or a 4-week period face an upward pressure to go up, have now been granted a 2-week kind of grace period, a waiting period before counties who have stepped down then pop into a higher risk category. And so in this week's movement week, we see 2 counties, Malheur and Jackson, both of whom had come out of extreme risk. Well, in the case of Jackson, had come from extreme into high, but now faced, according to the existing protocol, they would have been going back into extreme. In the case of Malheur, they were down in the moderate category and then moved up into high. So this new policy from the governor's office is that the movement would not happen immediately, but a county would be given a 2-week period in which to put additional measures into place to try to bring those case counts down. Certainly, I think the conversation has noted in particularly for communities not unlike ours, but certainly this creates some degree of risk for our small business owners who have weathered more than a year now of economic restrictions associated with COVID-19. They've done their part to help to reduce community spread and are now beginning to take some tentative steps forward to scale up, to hire new staff, to order inventory. And so we have to recognize the risk associated with that. And, some of the conversation is really in terms of does case counts and test positivity rates alone really capture the state of disease transmission? And are there other metrics, particularly at the high risk and the extreme risk, that can give more context to the capacity of the community to manage whatever community spread remains, including metrics, for instance, like hospital capacity. And the other piece of the conversation is, are we looking at specific thresholds, or are we really more interested in trends? So just building on the conversation, I think, from Mr. McCrae's presentation and his thoughts around metrics and guidance, we see metrics really playing out here in ways that are quite substantial to people's livelihoods. I want to turn then to really kind of specifically looking at our progress in vaccinating here in Lane County, specifically the progress to date. And these data are from OHA and were published yesterday at midnight 01. And I will tell you, these are behind. We have actually vaccinated more people here than are showing up currently in this data set. So we've made progress in terms of not only the individuals who have received their first doses, but also now fully vaccinated. And you see as well just the trend lines beginning to go up each week as we go in the chart on the right-hand side. The progress over the weekend as we continue to vaccinate individuals is now beginning to tax our ability to do data entry. And so we now have stacks of paper registration records. But just over the weekend, just Saturday and Sunday alone, we were able to deliver 4,649 first doses at the Florence Events Center, at the Lane Events Center, and at LCC, and 2,645 boost doses. So those were just the county's contribution, but we are seeing other partners stepping up as well. So last week, Peace Health delivered 1,388 first doses through their increasing efforts at the Riverbend Annex. They hit 474 as a maximum daily first dose number, and their intent is to be vaccinating 5 days a week. They also are extending their efforts to their footprint in Cottage Grove, and on Saturday they delivered 96 first vaccinations. In this coming week, tomorrow, at Peace Harbor is scheduled to do 100 vaccinations as well, first doses for our 65 plus population. So Peace Health is working with us in partnership. They are drawing all of their appointments from the Lane vaccine registry and helping us continue to work through that registry. And they are really beginning to ramp up their progress. So as we get moving, Peace Health intends to be able to deliver over 2,000 first doses every week as we scale up. Of course, we continue to build our partnership with our federal retail pharmacy programs. The community health clinics are receiving doses as well. And we continue to provide some of the vaccines that we are receiving directly to medical practices in town, primary care providers, as well as some of our partners in the community who can help us maximize the number of shots going into arms. I think certainly we've been focused very much on our ability to, in this month in particular, deliver vaccines to our senior population. So these are dated. These data came from a poll from, these are Wayne County vaccinations specifically for our age eligible individuals. And this is dated 6 days ago. So we have delivered quite a lot more in the way of vaccines targeted at this population. But you can see as of the 3rd of March, we were over half of our 80 plus population has received their first dose. Many of whom are on the docket to be fully vaccinated over this past weekend as well as this coming weekend. We're at 42% in our 75 to 79 population. We're at 29% in our 70 to 74 population. And of course, we're at 13% of our 65 to 69 population. So overall, as of 6 days ago, we were a third of the way through our age eligible population, and we still have a month yet to go before we move into, well, the better part of a month, 3 weeks to go before we move into the next wave. So just reminding you what's further down the road. So the month of March is really ensuring that we complete our age eligible population to the greatest extent that we possibly can. Phase 1B groups 1 through 4 are substantially complete with respect to the child care providers, early learning, and K-12 educators and staff. We literally are down to the last perhaps less than 200, we think, within that group. We continue to focus on some of our phase 1A categories. We believe that the healthcare professionals have substantially been completed in groups 1 and 4. We continue to focus effort very specifically on our intellectual and developmental disability community. We know of a few hundred there that have yet to have access to vaccine. They continue to be a high priority for us. Caregivers are another area that we are continuing to provide focused support, and really looking forward to being able to provide access to vaccine with them over the next few weeks with the intent of really closing out phase 1A toward the end of the month, as we also continue to prepare ourselves for the next round of eligibility, group 6. So as you see, adults 45 to 64 with one or more underlying health conditions are next up. We have yet to receive specific guidance from OHA around group 6. We don't yet know if that entire group will be opened or if they will be sequenced as we move forward. Finally, I think just a couple of remarks about where we are in the kind of vaccine production rollout. So we are being advised by OHA that particularly with the Johnson & Johnson and Merck partnership, Merck was pursuing a vaccine on their own, dropped that effort, and joined with Johnson & Johnson to lend their considerable production capacity to maximizing the output of Johnson & Johnson. We are being advised that we are likely to see pretty substantial increases within the next 2 to 3 weeks. OHA is reaching out to each of the local public health authorities around the state to really kind of sit down and understand our various philosophies about how we intend to scale. As Steve indicated, we compare favorably to other large counties around the state. In terms of our per capita vaccination rates, and in some instances, even exceeding the number of doses administered by larger counties in our efforts. And we differ a little bit too, in that Wayne County has the largest share of doses going directly to the local public health authority. So many other counties are more highly dependent upon their hospitals to deliver vaccines. Here it has been really kind of a public sector led initiative in terms of getting doses in arms. That is not to say that we're wanting to go it alone, nor do we wish to not leverage the many channels that are available to us. But as we look at our capacity and what we've been able to build thus far and what's on the drawing board coming down the road in terms of our mass vaccination capabilities, we believe that we can deliver more doses more quickly, more efficiently, and more effectively through mass vaccination activities that we are currently running at our various sites, including a new site at Autzen Stadium, which is scheduled to be operational the weekend after next. That will bring 16 additional lanes to bear on our efforts. And our kind of high-level thinking at the moment is that we are going to be in a mass vax business now for the next 3 to 4 months as we really push as many individuals in Lane County through our process, augment that by specific targeted missions going out into the community, bringing vaccine to some of our underserved partners and those who have borne disproportionate impact. And for whom a mass vaccination scenario is not the best scenario for getting access to vaccine, coupled with increasing our direct deliveries to our various partners, our pharmacies and our primary care providers and our hospital systems who are all stepping up. So it is very much an all of the above strategy, and it is maximizing every available channel to us with a goal to ensure that we complete this mass vaccination activity by midsummer to late summer at the latest. Here, Bernie, that's my briefing for the board this morning.
Well, that was great. Thank you very much. Are there commissioners that would like to make comments or ask questions? Commissioner Bozovich.
So you had a graphic up on the screen that had the percentage of certain age groups that have been vaccinated. Is that information available? I know our Tableau was down today, but is that something that you can get to on Tableau normally? Or is that specific information that you gathered for this meeting?
That is data that OHA provided us late last week. They have given us what they call jurisdictional data. So Chair Bernie, that was one of the issues that we have been elevating throughout this entire time. We've only been able to see in the state database those shots that we administered. We couldn't see any other shot that was administered within the state. We actually got access to that last week. It came in the form of a humongous Excel spreadsheet, which we are porting over into a database that our Tableau can start to look at. So it gives us the ability to look at race, ethnicity, by age, and other categories that are being tracked within the statewide database. So we'll be able to serve out new data, and we anticipate having new reports on Tableau available soon, hopefully within the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I really appreciate maybe getting sent that particular image, particularly with the date that the data is good for. I get lots of, I'm sure all the commissioners are getting lots of requests from people that are in their 80s and wonder why their friend that's in their 70s got their shot and they haven't heard anything, and failures to understand that the state has told us we can't set priority by age, that as they open age groups, it becomes part of a larger pool, and that pool, but we are doing our best, and that graphic shows that we are actually, have a much higher percentage of the 80 plus than the 70 plus folks vaccinated, so they can see that even though we're, being directed by the state to work on that entire age span as a pool, the 80-year-olds are still ahead. So I guess I'm trying to help you guys maybe communicate with the public, because that is the biggest misunderstanding out there in the public right now, is that, that 90-year-old World War II vet somehow or another should have been getting their vaccine ahead of this 70-year-old. And they don't understand that once the 70-year-olds were made eligible by the state, they're on an equal footing with the 90-year-old as far as eligibility for vaccine, and there is no real priority list. So that's been difficult for me to communicate, because I didn't truly understand that direction from the state until a week or two ago. I thought there was some kind of priority list. So that needs to be well communicated out to the public so they understand that. And we have to do everything we can to help some of our seniors navigate the system. I was on the phone with somebody that didn't understand that the survey they were sent was a prerequisite to getting their vaccine appointment. They just thought it was a survey. So those sort of things that are confusing to our seniors sometimes, we just need to keep helping them with as much as possible. Those of us that are computer savvy and understand where, you tell a senior, look in your junk mail file, and they're like, huh? What's a junk mail file?
Right.
Yeah. So we have to keep on top of that, but I really appreciate that graphic because it truly shows that we are making progress, with our most vulnerable, because everything we know about COVID, the mortality increases with age. And that's where we really should be concentrating our vaccinations. But we're dealing with this pool partly just to make sure we don't waste vaccine. If we can't get a hold of all the 90-year-olds and we have more vaccine, we need to have somebody to give it to. But I really appreciate that. And hopefully you can get that image to me and maybe I can help get that message out there about the pool.
Chair Bernie, Commissioner Bozievich, absolutely. I'd be delighted to send the images to you all after this meeting. I so appreciate your use of the terminology pool because that truly is what it is. There certainly has been, I think, in the broader public imagination, this notion of a line and line cutters. That I have heard that over and over and over again. And in fact, it is a pool, and we're trying to bring people out of that pool as quickly as we possibly can before new folk get added to it. We have made progress against those percentage points. I wish I had a more recent image, but I think that does tell the story of where we were 6 days ago. I think the other point that is really crucial is that we can make more rapid progress as we go. And we think that we can potentially, if the dose forecasts are as favorable as they might be moving forward, we have high hopes of being able to close out. And as you note, there is something of it's not a bell curve. It's a bell curve pushed way back to the origin, just in terms of with each new group that I get, it's much easier to get, 60, 80% of that group finished. But when I get into the final 20 to 10% of a given group, the level of effort required to get that final piece it goes right up, and we have to exert more resource to get to the final few folks in each of these. And so there is a balancing act here, is that we're talking about population health. So the population as a whole benefits from every arm that gets a shot, just in terms of cutting off all of the different legs of transmission as we go. So that's also a harder concept for many individuals to grasp as well. So we are balancing speed, efficiency, equity, and risk in a highly dynamic fashion with the resources that we have. And I don't think we get it right all the time, but we certainly try to. Chair Bernie.
Yes, thank you. Moving along. By the way,
I have one more quick question.
Forget it. I'm just sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Are we going to prioritize the single dose J&J vaccine for the homeless population that's so difficult to contact and maybe get a return appointment?
So Chair Bernie and Commissioner Bozievich, we are looking specifically at the use of Johnson & Johnson in many of our missions that are going to be very difficult in order to be able, so to the extent that it requires a higher degree of logistics to get the shot delivered, the extent to which we are thinking about resource allocation in order to get people back for a second shot. So there's several applications that I think would be really beneficial for the single dose regimen. I think that that's going to grow as part of the broader portfolio of doses that are available to us across all 3 vaccines. So we're going to see it not only in mass vac scenario available to the broader public, but also in many of our specific missions where we're taking staff out and going to a particular place and trying to provide vaccine to a smaller group of folks, such as the individuals that you just mentioned. Yes.
I did not mean to cut you off. Great questions, Commissioner. I saw Commissioner Farr had his hand up.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. And this short meeting is growing long, so I'll keep my my question very, very brief. Steve, first off, thank you for your hospitality and showing me and explaining in detail how the vaccination clinic was working at the event center this weekend. You are part of the marvelous orchestration. You're the one with the baton in your hand. Let's put it that way. And I really admire the work that you are doing. My question, Steve, and this is based on something that Commissioner Bozievich just said. My question is this: can I accurately and truthfully say to, for instance, a 92-year-old that even though you've been eligible longer, and even though you've been registered longer, Lane County is not allowed to prioritize you ahead of younger people who became eligible after you? Is that a true statement? We're not allowed to?
Chair Bernie, Vice Chair Farr, indeed. So vaccine eligibility means that you're eligible for a vaccine, and we provide a vaccination opportunity to you. For the 92-year-old individual, I would note that we have individuals in the intellectual and developmental disability community that have been eligible since mid-January that we've not been able to get vaccine to. So to the extent that we want to use the line analogy, that 92-year-old's place in the line has yet to be called if we're still going all the way back to phase 1A and thinking about all the folks who would need to go through that. So as you know, we've been given various kinds of direction at different points along the way, and our current guidance is we offer vaccine to everyone who's eligible.
And while I don't like to pass the buck, our hands are essentially held in place. We're not allowed to prioritize people who've been in line longer. But let me back off on that. The term line, you have very eloquently and clearly stated to me in person and in public that it's not a line, it's a pool. And that we're drawing people from a pool, not a line, and there's no line bumping. That being said, Steve Adams, you know that me reporting that to people is not necessarily comforting to them. And so each of us as county commissioners, as we respond to people, I have found that hearing a human voice sometimes is the only comforting thing, because they've been online, they've gotten to the point where it says next, and they push the button and there's no next. And they've gotten to the point where they've made phone calls to 211 or whomever, and nobody has answered. Just hearing a voice sometimes is the comfort that they need. Even if you're not giving them the news that they would love to hear, you're giving them news, and that is the most comforting thing. Steve Adams, thanks again for your work. Steve Mokrahajski, your team has been outstanding work. I'll say it again.
Thank you. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for this sort of report of relief and hope, but also continued caution that even as more folks are vaccinated, we all still have to keep doing our part with the protective and preventive measures to prevent spread. That's my greatest concern right now, as all these numbers in your report looks better and better, is that folks will have a false sense of safety and how we can be behaving throughout these next several months. I have a couple of comments and questions. I know all of us have received calls and emails from constituents, and I just have to say, as those numbers go up of shots in arms, we have to remember that it's a very relatively small number of people that are complaining or concerned, and it's all about from a place of frustration, because scarcity breeds anxiety, and that once people go through the system, I have never heard a negative comment about people's experience at the clinics themselves. So that's phenomenal and really important to remember. So again, thanking staff for your help with messaging, as Commissioner Farr just raised, how important that is not only just to give us really good words to share with folks, but so that we're all on the same page and that we're messaging in the same direction. I think that's really important with our partners at OHA as well. As much as constituents are frustrated with the registration process, we at the county level may be frustrated with the priority process and framework at the state level, but we still do and are operating in partnership with them to do our best. And I think it's really important to the general public to see us all pointing in the same direction around best public health practice and doing the best we can to serve the community. I have a question about supply relative to our capacity to administer and that scaling plan. I know just a few weeks ago, right, we were only receiving 1,200 doses, and you're like, we could be doing literally 6-7 times that. But as supply goes up, where do we have a sense of is that going to surpass? Is supply going to surpass our capacity? So that's my first question.
Thank you, Chair Burney and Commissioner Trigger. We are actively building out Auxin, so that of course, we've got to staff it as well, and that's what keeps me up at night thinking about those issues. We have managed to stay ahead of the curve, both by tapping new resources, partnerships in the community, bringing new volunteers on, being able to tap into Servor now as a local resource as opposed to a state resource. That's a huge game changer for us in terms of being able to get vaccinators on the ground. We're confident that we can operate and maintain our mass vaccination capacity. We think that we can even get more efficiencies out of the existing operations. We had rated the fairgrounds, for instance, the Lane Events Center at 2,500 a day. We can do 3,000 a day easily with the same footprint, just as we continue to try to do process improvement and continue to tinker with the throughput model so that we can increase efficiency without losing the human touch there. So I think that in the near term, I think we have the capacity to get those shots in arms and to stay within our current performance measure of every dose received gets delivered in 7 days.
Great, thank you. Just one more question and then a quick comment. Actually, I'll do the comment first, which is the issue of volunteering. I understand, folks really wanting to step up. So I don't know how people find out the best way to do that. Something I learned through some work with United Way years ago, I love this statement, is that volunteerism, volunteers, it's a pay grade, not a job description. Right, so you can have people at a high level profession delivering professional services without pay. That's volunteerism. We often tend to think of it as like, oh, they're the envelope stuffers or the grunt work people. But really, it's all kinds of jobs, and it's just a pay grade. And so there's, I'm sure, all kinds of work that requires high level professional expertise, but maybe also work that can be done without that. I also know there's often people with high level professional expertise who what they want to do with their volunteer work is not what they do all day for pay. So I'm wondering if part of our capacity solution, how we're working with, for instance, our local United Way to funnel volunteers to us in ways that are right fit for all the constraints that we have, but also to as part of our increasing capacity. So that's sort of a note to learn more about our volunteer program and how we're leveraging that. My question for you very specifically is if you could share any more briefly, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I think this is really important, more details of our efforts to serve the unique needs of our Black, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islander communities within the eligibility criteria, understanding all that we've talked about as it relates to, and how you briefly mentioned the mass vac sites are not always the most welcoming or perceived as safe environments for certain folks in our community. So if you could share just a little bit very specifically about actions that we're taking to ensure we're meeting the needs of folks who are perhaps most vulnerable of exposure and consequence of the illness and the pandemic writ large.
Of which are
Thank you, Commissioner Trigger. So specifically, much of the work is really in partnership with our community-based organization partners, and really beefing up. And as we are scaling up our vaccine branch, creating new staff spots, and then rearranging some of the staff within the operations branch. Very specifically, right across the board, Jason Davis, our PIO, recently hired communications professionals who are specifically working directly with communities of color and really understanding some of those issues, and then ideas that are being generated by the community are coming right into our vaccine planning piece. I think we view this as an opportunity to help build the capacity of our community-based organizations. This is their moment to shine. This does not have to be a Wayne County affair. I have no pride of ownership here. To the extent that we can work with our CBO partners who can advise us on the most culturally appropriate ways to make vaccine available for those individuals within specific communities of color who meet eligibility requirements, we want to be there and support that. So that is specifically looking at pop-up clinics. It's using some of our FEMA funds to purchase food for the event, whatever is needed to ensure that we get a critical mass of individuals so that we can deliver vaccine.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Last week, our mass vaccination efforts,
Thank you.
Lane Event Center and
Is there any other commissioner that
vaccinated
would like to state anything at this point?
4,649 individuals. The boost doses that were administered were around 2,645. Out of Florence, we did 1,040.
Steve,
Peace Health was able to grab
what's our current
1,385
capacity? How many vaccines a week?
Those are the
Does
numbers
Lane
of mass
County have the
vaccination
capacity to
Obviously,
deliver
we still
right
have our
now?
pharmacies and
I think our capacity to deliver right now in a week is right at about 10,000 doses through our existing mass vax sites, and that's growing.
Then that's growing. What will it be in 2 weeks?
Our allocation was
in 2 weeks. I think that we could be approaching 15,000.
And how many doses are we now getting a week as of last week?
Overall, I think
let's see. So I am awaiting delivery of 8,410 doses in Lane County, 7240 of which are coming to us.
Thank you, sir. So we're going to be dealing with supply and demand, right? And I'm blown away by this staff's ability to build capacity beyond supply. So that what at this point in time, there will come a time where that changes.
We are also
right? And we are going to be over capacity, and we're not there yet. So Commissioner Traeger, you mentioned and other commissioners, this is going to be a constant give and take, but as it relates to equity, as it relates to quantity, as it relates to performance, Steve Mokrahysky, Steve Adams, your staff are volunteers, which obviously has nothing to do with professionalism. It's pay grade, National Guard, everyone. This is a community-wide effort. You guys are doing freaking great. You've got it handled. We thank you so much. There's always room for improvement. I can tell you the stories that Steve Mokrahysky gave to start this off with. I personally have lived through those stories with two of my predecessors who were Springfield area county commissioners. Frustration, what the heck, experience the Vax clinic over the weekend, nothing but praise, nothing but thanks. And they're spreading the word too. So thank you both and everyone you represent so very, very much.
In the community, and especially addressing some of the historical.
Are there any other statements or questions before we move on with
the Black community has around public health and
thank you, Steve.
Healthcare delivery systems? So an important conversation to have. And one
we are now on item 6, consent calendar.
That's happening this evening. I encourage
there are 3 orders
check that out
in the consent calendar. Does anyone want to move approval?
On that note, I think as we
thank you, Chair Burney. I move the consent calendar for March 9th, 2021.
Very thankful.
Is there a second?
We are seeing increases.
I'll second.
that we have been seeing.
It has been
But
the
still,
consent calendar
not high enough
approval
to
for
move
March
through
9th,
the
2021 has been
eligibility
made by
status,
Commissioner
folks
Farr,
that are
seconded by
eligible,
Commissioner
and
Buck. Is there
speeding
discussion to the
certainly
motion?
doing the best we can, but it seems premature to have that
Seeing
conversation
none,
around
all
vaccine
those in
confidence. But
favor,
really, it's not.
please signify
right now
by
we have a lot of
saying
folks who
aye.
want the vaccine.
Aye.
They can't get it, and that's causing
Opposed?
frustration.
Nay.
That will pass. We will get to a
And the
point
consent
very soon
calendar has
where
been
we have,
unanimously
get
approved,
into our general population,
made by Commissioner
vaccinated
Farr,
them, and then
seconded
we'll
by
hit a
Commissioner
wall.
Buck.
And
Thank you.
we strongly
We are
believe
now
that it would
on
be
item
short
7,
of our
County
70%
Council,
of our
Mr.
population
Dingle.
that we need to be vaccinated in order to achieve herd immunity.
Chair
As
Bernie,
we've mentioned, Dr.
I have
Leski's
no
laid out a
specific
plan.
announcements, but we do have
70
two
by
executive
September,
sessions
so
scheduled
70%
for later
of
this
our
morning.
population vaccinated by September, which will
Thank you,
help us
sir.
achieve herd immunity and prevent those large-scale outbreaks
Then
and the
item
overall
8,
impact of COVID on
County Administration
but
announcements.
in order to do that, we
Guys,
really do need to
I
start
just
talking
have
about
one.
vaccine
I will say I have two, but I'm going to hold on one. I heard Commissioner Trigger's reference a voter's pamphlet. I just want you to know I'm prepared. I've had conversations with the clerk, and before, depending on what the board discussion is and direction is, I have some information to share with you about that. So I'm going to hold on that one, basically, depending on your conversation. And then I just want to provide a brief update on, it was referenced this morning, Commissioner Buck brought up the American Rescue Plan. I think I called it something different. Maybe use terminology. American ARP, American Rescue Plan, that has been approved by the Senate, is back in the House of Representatives for reconciliation. So not final, but nearing final completion.
So,
approximately
also,
1.9 trillion.
we got word from the state that we will be moving from high risk.
It's a large, it's also 642 page document that we are sifting through. There's a lot there, I think, is the overarching piece that I will say, and it's going to take some time for all of us to work through all of it. You won't be surprised to know that we have a team of folks. We've assembled a team of folks to review and dive into the details of that. Alex Kyler, our intergovernmental relations manager, who's doing, you've got so many of our people have so many balls in the air, but Alex is doing great work with the legislative session and all this federal work. Our work with U of O and OSU and Benton County. So Alex is leading this team along with Christine Moody, our budget manager, Robert Tintle, our finance manager, who left for a minute to go to Benton County, but then realized what he was missing, so he came back to Lane County. So he's back on our team for good here. So even there's some saying in a movie about once you're out, you're never out. Yeah. So even if they leave, they come back. And then our team in Health and Human Services, Diana Felice, and her staff are working on reviewing. They've kind of carved out different pieces of the bill, reviewing that and understanding. So it's a novel at 642 pages. There's approximately over 300 billion for state and local governments. And so we're reviewing that. Each city within Lane County would receive an allocation is over $60 million that would go to cities. There's over $100 billion for public schools. There's funding for small businesses and restaurants. There's funding for
metro areas,
rental assistance.
With denser population.
They're just the general categories. I'll say public health, public assistance, behavioral health, so mental health and substance abuse, workforce development, schools, particularly there's some elements related to homeless students, higher ed. I mean, the list sort of goes on and on. And so the thing that we're reviewing all of that, but I think it's going to be really important that as an organization and as a community, we understand there are a lot of different pieces of this that we'll want to understand and look at, okay, what are the pieces that the direct allocations for state and local governments that are really for revenue replacement and emergency response related to COVID, and those pieces, as well as community economic impacts and response efforts, and a lot of pieces that are going to require partnership, right? We will likely want to work with United Way and the school districts to say, how can we work together? Because these are really parts of our community that we serve together in different ways, but together. So that is hallmark of our. I think that is everything. I just wanted to, I'm not getting into the details because now is not really the time for that, but I will also say that we have a team of our staff that are working on identifying areas of revenue loss and
We like to get
direct
outdoors. We
emergency
like to
response
have,
related to
outdoor
COVID and other
activities.
pieces
Sun
that
shines, that's exactly what we do.
in developing a
And
plan
so
that's
as the weather
consistent
becomes
with the
better
board's
and people
strategic plan and the
are
priorities you've
enjoying
identified
more
there,
and more time
with
outdoors,
an eye not only
we
towards
here in Lane
schools
County are
that
fortunate to
have been
fortunate enough
negatively
to
and
be
critically
close to those
impacted by the
outdoor
pandemic, but
opportunities. We
also
have ample parks, we
critical
have
priorities of the board related to
activities
housing and
enjoy just
shelter,
within a few minutes drive,
wildfire
whereas in some
recovery, and
metro
those
areas,
types of
it's
areas.
a much harder task.
So I'll stop there. I know you have a lot to
So for
get
us,
through,
I think,
and happy to
we are
answer any
very
questions. And
fortunate,
again, I
to
have
be able
information
to,
related to the voter
have
pamphlet
social
if you
activities
so desire.
outdoors, and that has a tremendous impact.
Are there any questions for Mr. Mulcahy?
Making their way into our county and circulating, making sure that we have
Steve, if I
healthy
may,
activities that are not
so in addition to responding to a
spaces
pandemic
critical.
that's become a public health
also,
crisis,
I think that
and now
our delivery system
directing staff to help solve it through vaccines
and when I
clinics,
talked about that, it's not just
supporting people to be quarantined,
primary care
and supporting local businesses, many of whom have gone out of business, others of whom are hanging in there,
contact tracing
and dealing with institutional and other forms of racism that are now coming to the fore.
And we haven't talked enough about.
In addition,
the
now
ability to help folks
our staff
understand
is
their test
looking
status,
at what our
and
share
then
of the
act accordingly
$1.9
has been
trillion
crucial for
federal
our
package
efforts.
will be.
Early on
Don't
in
quite
the
have
pandemic,
your
and
hands
then,
around it in order to
when
talk
we were
about
seeing
it.
our spike,
But it will be forthcoming, and it will be added
sort of
to
compounded as
the
you get
heapingly
a
over
drastic
full
increase in
plate
cases.
that we have. Is that
You can't
correct?
do the same level of detail.
Yes, and I think the thing I would add to kind of what your point here, Chair Bernie, is
as we start to see a little
the rescue plan is really critical, right? There's so many layers of it for our community. It's private sector, public sector, schools. It's all of these pieces.
So all those things,
and so there's a really big upside here in that there. In terms of repairing the damage that's been done over the past year and sort of the lagging damage, it's going to be critical. But there's also a huge amount of work. So when you just think about, oftentimes we're in the position of saying we need more money, we need resources to do these things. Now we have the ability to say, okay, there's some resources that may be available for us to tap into. We now have to think about our capacity within this organization and within our community to actually
and understanding that just because you can
administer those, to go after and to administer those funds. So it's a whole, so we all should be thinking, oh, good, funds available to do these different things that are the needs of the community. But along with that comes a huge workload for years. This isn't like for a few weeks or a few months, like over the next several years. So that's what we're thinking. The conversation we're having is, what is the capacity we need to build in our organization, our community, to be able to capture this opportunity and leverage what is potentially available, and do what's right for our community. So big upside, but huge amount of additional work that is going to be required.
This is the best problem to have.
Folks are going to go ahead and
okay, thank you very much, Steve. Commissioner business.
Chair Bernie,
to get out and enjoy.
This is Diana. If I can interrupt for one moment, we are having terrible audio difficulties for the people watching the webcast. It appears as if someone who's on this meeting might also be listening to another meeting in the background, and we're picking up all that audio. If any of you are listening to another meeting, if you could turn it off, that would be extremely helpful.
We're perfect in Lane County in that we don't.
Diana, Chair Bernie, I can hear Commissioner Krieger through the wall, and it's about 1 second behind what I'm hearing directly on mine. I don't know if that's it.
We're actually picking up an entirely different meeting. We're picking up the public health meeting on top of this meeting.
Travel recreationally.
The public health
potentially increases.
Jason Davis is also coming across loud and clear in our meeting. So if anyone is listening to that meeting, if you could put that on mute or close it out, that would be very helpful. We have Metro looking into it, but as of right now, people watching the meeting are having a very difficult time hearing anything.
And try your very best.
Do any commissioners hear that? Because I don't.
Pursue health the same way you would in your day-to-day life when you're on vacation.
So
I was hearing a little something in the background, and I actually turned my audio off for a second, wondering if maybe my clock radio would come on or something like that.
for helping to identify
Well, we have
cases.
Metro looking into it on their end, but I just wanted to make sure nobody was running, you know, multitasking back there. Sorry to interrupt the meeting. I'm just trying to get clarity for the people watching. Thank you.
Even though that travel happens.
Thank you. I know of nothing else to do but to
comment.
continue, even under this circumstance. So
Lauren
we are
McGrady
on
with
item
NBC
9,
16,
Commissioner
and
Business.
Sam Broadway with
A,
KEPW
announcements. Are
Newsday
there
both
any
had similar
announcements from
questions.
any commissioners?
How are you communicating
Commissioner
with the
Farr.
homeless about getting vaccines?
Thank you,
How will
Chair
clearing
Bernie.
homeless
Since
camps
we had our
impact
last
their
board meeting,
vaccination
I've attended a
process?
couple of committee meetings.
So,
One is a fly on the wall,
thankfully,
not even a liaison,
fantastic
which was the Equity and Access
resources
Board
around
meeting
health
last week.
and
And then last night,
and I think
yesterday,
it's a
I
testament to
participated
how
in the
fantastic they are that,
in the
no
Public
matter
Health
how
Advisory
much we
Committee
improve
meeting,
those
which I am the
resources,
liaison to. And the Board of County Commissioners work came up in that meeting in three
understand the
areas.
need for more.
One of them
So,
was
I'm
in
not talking about
response
solving the
to
homeless crisis. I'm talking about
discussion
the actual
surrounding
resources afforded to individuals
styrofoam
the access to
and
those resources.
styrofoam food containers.
You know, partners
The
like Whitebird,
Public Health Advisory Committee heard,
and other partners in the
it seemed
community,
like fairly loud and
have
clear that
been
we would like
meeting
them
with
to take a
Lane
look
County.
at
I
that,
mentioned the meeting last
at,
week. I attended
at
part of that
styrofoam
meeting.
food service containers
Have already
specifically.
begun
And
conversations around
I think
vaccine
staff will,
confidence. That was
Dr. Warren
issue,
and other staff members will
for our
guide them
unhoused
through that process,
population,
whatever it is that they need to
that,
do.
you know, there
Sometimes they
is,
appoint a subcommittee to work on
distrust,
things, sometimes they
for
work as a
government
committee
in
as the
general
whole.
amongst the unhoused population.
The
And
second
so,
thing that we talked
associated with
about
vaccines and vaccine
was
efforts with
the
government, you know, we have to overcome that.
was
And so
surrounding
those conversations are happening.
racism
The way in which to have
as
those
a
conversations is not
crisis,
for me
as
to
a health
comment
crisis.
necessarily on broadcast
I'm going to bring that up when we get to the agenda
to do
team items. I mentioned last week that I was going to bring that up as an
to
agenda
have,
request. They
one-to-one
have forwarded a
conversations with
request
trusted
to the Board of County
individuals
Commissioners, which I will
providing
carry
services to that community. That's
in
what's
the agenda item
Are
requests.
they reaching everyone? No.
Thank you.
But that's
Thank you,
what
Commissioner.
we're going to figure out and try
Other
our very best
commissioners?
to address. And then when they become eligible as a general
Okay.
group, not dependent on age,
Unless I'm missing someone, if I am, I'm sorry, yell at me. But I think
we'll make
we
sure
are now
that we
item
have as many people
9, Commissioner
willing
Business,
and ready to receive
B,
vaccines as
future
possible.
board assignment
Clearing
requests.
camps is a tough
Is
issue.
there-
There are public health
Commissioner
reasons
Butt.
for clearing the camp, obviously.
Thank you, Chair.
And I think, you know, even the
per my,
those folks who really do
words
work
earlier
day in, day out with our unhoused population.
under remonstrance, I
They're very
would
much
really like to
can't
see
see the
us
need,
find a way
at
in which we
times
can
to pursue help
reduce some
by
permit
moving
fees for
people
wildfire
or
victims.
dispersing or
And
shifting it around.
this can be
However, that's
either
not
in the
always
form
the
of
case.
a
And with
work
vaccination,
session for
what's
us
critical for us is
or
communication.
a report back
And,
from
you know,
staff.
like what we've been talking about. The Johnson & Johnson bill
There needs
does
to be
provide an
some
advantage in that
discussion about
reduces
it,
the overall
and
amount of communication we have to have after
and
that.
I'm not sure, maybe Mr.
So that'll
McCarthy
be
has
part
some
of our
thoughts
strategy as
on
well
which
on
way
mobile
that could
strike teams
go
that are
if
nimble
there's
and
enough
able
head-ons.
to move from camp to camp. We will also be.
I apologize. I had to
utilizing,
step
our
away from my
partner
desk, so I didn't hear what the, is this related to the voters pamphlet?
Tremendous.
Nope.
This is
On that
related,
call, I think, you know, we had
this is related
40
to
to
permit
50
fees for
local
wildfire
partner
victims.
agencies represented. And each of
A
them
way in
were,
which we
more than
can
willing,
reduce those fees,
to,
either as a work session or a
chip in
report
and
back
lend a
from
hand.
you
So I don't think
and
the
Public
infrastructure
Works.
to deliver the vaccine is going to be an issue. It's the vaccine supply.
So,
And
so
then that
Commissioner Butt,
eligibility coming
is
around.
that an
So,
either
I
or
do
would you like
anticipate
to?
that we will be able to.
Yeah, I'm not
address
sure
that,
how, which way
coming
is
weeks,
better.
but
I know that
bring
there's
up a
some
good point.
discussions
Vaccine
within
confidence
staff that would
issues.
need
We
to
have to put
happen
that in those communities.
prior to us having a work
And any
session
help that
about
we
it
can
and
in
reviewing
reaching those
what
communities, having
we
those
could
trusted
or could
conversations
not
is greatly
do.
appreciated.
So maybe a full
Also
work
from
session would be
Lauren,
helpful so that staff
Lane
has enough
County's
time to do
average
that
of fully
background work
vaccinated people
and
is
come up
lower
with
than the state
some
average. Why
some
is
potential
that?
ideas.
Lauren, if you remember back
So,
in January,
go ahead, Steve.
when we received.
Well, I just was gonna say, I think
400
it,
doses early, no doses the next
I
week,
had a
and
conversation with
about
Commissioner
2
Buck
weeks late
about this, and I do
overall
think
doses.
that it would make sense
That is still
for us to have a
happening.
work session
So
with the
while we
board,
saw,
at the very,
the
certainly
state
whatever you would
average
like to do, but I think it
counties
would
like
make
Marion
sense for us
County
to have,
receiving 10,000
sort of
doses a
provide
week.
sort of a broader update on, you get these updates
So,
on a monthly
you know, we
basis
were
from Matt.
overjoyed to hear that
But to have a work session really to now start to talk about where the areas that are really challenging, and we know are going to be challenging, and particularly that the timeline and cost related to rebuilding, and the fees is certainly one of those.
However, when
so I would support that, and we certainly are probably a little bit of time to bring some options to the board and to get the board's direction on what you would like to see.
Okay, if I may, Commissioner Buck, I want you to correct me if I'm misstating this, but my understanding is the request is to get head nods for a work session, not just on the information, which is important, which Mr. Mokry-Heisky identified, but also is on ways that we can mitigate the costs for people to, and the time for permit fees and get into rebuilding. Is that somewhat correct?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay. You have a head nod from me. Any other commissioners? I see Commissioner Trieger, Commissioner Bozovich. I think we have 4 or 5 head nods.
And can I just, before, sorry, Chair, to break in, but I'm Mike Finch is texting me and saying there are audio issues. The suggestion is maybe that because you're talking about things that I think the public certainly would want to know about, you may want to adjourn the meeting. It may be, if it's amenable to all of you, do the executive session. Let us figure out the audio issues and then reconvene after the executive session to finalize. I want you to at least know there are audio issues that are making it difficult for the public to hear the conversation before you make further decisions.
And I'm going to jump in real quick here too, Steve. I've got Metro calling me, so maybe if we could lead into exec session and come back, that might be helpful. And I will probably need. Hi, Neil. Okay, I'm getting text now that the audio is now fine. Thank you, Neil.
Well, thank you, invisible people. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Diana. I
have information is resolved.
You know, if with commissioner's indulgence, and Commissioner Bozovich, I know you have your hand up, but I'm just thinking if that wasn't legible for people, perhaps Commissioner Buck should restate her request so the public is aware. Perhaps we can once again nod our heads. Although before we do, I think Commissioner Bozovich also wanted to say something. Does that work for everyone?
Sure, Chair. I can repeat. I can repeat, and then we can go into discussion just so it's audible for everybody.
Please do.
My future board assignment request was to have a work session related to how we can lower the permit fees for wildfire evacuees, get a report from staff on information on how or what we need to do, options that are available to us in order to do that.
Perfect. Thank you, Commissioner. Are there head nods? Okay. Please note that there are head nods. That is a future agenda request. And Commissioner Bozovich.
I think the restatement kind of addressed one of the things is I want to make sure it was a work session and possible action because one of the things I would really like to have come is a set of options, whether it's using reserves to backfill those fees or using the Relief Act, that part of our 1.9 trillion to pay those fees and tie it to that's an economic stimulus, recovery, part of our economic stimulus and recovery, because that 1.9 trillion is going to be one-time money. And this is a one-time sort of expense that I think is a good use of that. So, whatever options we have, or is it, we use general fund reserves for that and we replace the general fund reserves out of that 1.9 trillion, but just some kind of list of options of how we might be able to take care of that permit issue. So we don't have a work session and then we're another 4 weeks or 6 weeks out before we actually take action. I'd like it to be, a work session to present options and then possible action if we think we've been presented an option that's workable and the board decides to go there. That's all I was trying to get at, was I don't want to have it just be a work session.
Thank you, Commissioner. My understanding is even though you got into different things, really, it's just you want to make sure there's options for action. Commissioner Buck, my understanding was that was in your request. Okay, it was. So we're all on this.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any 9B? Are there any other future board assignment requests? Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the people behind the curtain for making it so that the public can hear us. Much appreciated. As I mentioned earlier, this is about a voter pamphlet for the May 2021 election and beyond, I will say. We have all received multiple emails from members of the community expressing their desire that we publish a voter pamphlet for this May's election. And many of those have a common through line of the importance of this for a robust democracy, for a good accessible government. I echo all of those sentiments, but I also really want to point out this is a fundamental textbook example of an opportunity for us to put our commitment to equity into action. None of us currently serving on this board or ever any of our successors will ever have to face this challenge, right? This is a classic example of a small group of people with a lot of influence and power making a decision on behalf of another group when none of us are personally or directly affected or experience the barriers this other group faces, which is candidates running in these odd year cycles. So I think it's really important. It's a chance to embody the strategic priority we name in our strategic plan about managing equitable services for urban and rural residents, enhancing opportunities and access by embracing efficient systems and processes, collaboration with partners, and innovative approaches to solving problems. We state that in our strategic plan, and doing a voter pamphlet this May and every cycle helps us make good on that. It's also a geographic equity issue, right? We often have rural communities, which we're going to see this May with the Mohawk Valley Public Safety Levy. And they won't have access to the same voter outreach and information that folks running in even years do. And we have a countywide ballot measure with OSU extension. So I just think there's a lot of important reasons that we should be doing a voter pamphlet this May and beyond. So to that end, I have two related assignment asks, and I will make them separately. And before I make especially the first one, I want to acknowledge that this might put some extra stress and capacity burden on staff, particularly with COVID constraints this cycle. And I'm understanding and I'm really grateful to our elections clerk and her team and their values they place on integrity and delivering high quality product as it relates to election materials. And I want to make it clear, at least for myself, that I am on board to do everything I can to support them and provide whatever backing they need. So my first ask for a future assignment is for next week at our meeting that we make a decision about produce a voter pamphlet for the May 18th, 2021 election. And I'm happy to hear back if there are alternative products that the staff has in mind, if a full-blown voter pamphlet isn't an option, but I think we have to help voters with access and information about what's on their ballot this May. So my first ask is that we have time on the March 16th meeting next Tuesday, and that we hear back from our administrator and staff on what we can do to provide a voter pamphlet or some kind of substantive substitute for that for the May 2021 election. That is my first ask.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for clarification of Commissioner Trieger or Steve? You mentioned that you wanted to say a few things on this item.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I think so let me just say, first of all, the decision to do a voter pamphlet is always at the discretion of the board. Appreciate this has been a conversation in the past. And I think the staff definitely supports looking at this longer term issue of how if the board's policy is to do a voter pamphlet with every election, that we set up both the funding and the staff support and timeline and process to make that happen. That there are some practical challenges that I just want to share with the board. First, I will say in terms of Commissioner Trieger's request for a decision next week, from a timing standpoint, that won't work. You actually need to make a decision today. So let me just walk you through the timeline. The lane code, just when a voter pamphlet is done, lane code requires three things: an explanatory statement, which then requires the board to appoint a committee of not less than 3, no more than 5 person to write the explanatory statement. So that's one. So you have to appoint a committee of people to write the explanatory statement. The deadline for the explanatory statement, and we have 4 measures. So there are 2 county measures, and you'd have to appoint 2 different committees for both of those explanatory statements for the county measures. And then we'd have to work with the special districts to do the other 2. The deadline for the explanatory statement is March 18th. So if we wait till next Tuesday to have the discussion and you give direction, you see what I mean? So once you direct us to do the voter pamphlet, you also, so actually what you would need to do is today decide if you want to do a voter pamphlet as well as appoint the committee, or you would have to appoint the committee before next. Because if you don't appoint the committee till next week, it gives the committee 2 days to meet and write the explanatory statement. So that's one. Explanatory statement deadline. That's a statutory deadline of March 18th for the explanatory statement. And it's a lane code that requires the board to appoint a committee to do that. The second piece, the other 2 pieces are the arguments. So typically there's an argument for and against each measure. And then there are candidate statements. So for the 4 measures, there'd be an argument for and against. Those arguments are due March 22nd. So the explanatory statement for the 4 measures due March 18th, statutory requirement. The arguments for and against by the 4 committees, 2 of which are county, 2 are special districts, are due March 22nd. Additionally, the candidate statement. So we have 70 candidates on the ballot in May. And so we would need to reach out to all 70 candidates to provide them an opportunity to submit a candidate statement. All of this is in lane code. Also due March 22nd. So it is, I think that one of the concern, our elections clerk is, and we are all also concerned about the equity issue. And oftentimes what's happened when we got complaints last time, we did this 2 years ago, we did a voter pamphlet and it was done earlier. The decision was made earlier to do it. There were some complaints from candidates in particular said, I didn't have enough time to submit my statement. So certainly understand the concern about equity and making sure that everyone has the opportunity. I think we also want to make sure that if we're providing that opportunity, there's equal opportunity for all 70 of those people as well as the 4 measures. So I think that those are all the statutory requirements and the code requirements. And again, I would just say, I think that if the board's going to make a decision, our feeling is there really needs to be a direction today, and you would need to make a decision sometime today or tomorrow as part of this meeting to appoint the members of the measures.
Thank you for that information. And before other commissioners join in the discussion, I see that Commissioner Trieger has wanted to respond.
Thank you. I just want to express, I have to express some frustration as someone who's been on this board just a couple of months. This came up a month ago. We had an opportunity to do something about this with far more lead time. We opted to send it to our legislative committee, and these are not ins and outs that I'm familiar with or aware of. And it's just, I just have to express a real frustration that we have essentially created a greater problem for ourselves through our own inattention and inaction than we needed to. I mentioned I had 2 asks. My other one is a more long-term one. I'm going to wait till the appropriate time to make that, but I do want to flag that this is not something we should be in crisis about or in reactive mode about. Here we are in that place. And I have to express that frustration that we didn't have to be here.
Thank you. Are there any commissioners before Commissioner Trieger, if it's all right with you, Commissioner, before you identify the second, want to speak to this one? Commissioner Bozovich.
Sorry, getting unmuted. You know, it's interesting because I'm hearing from both sides about a desire to have a voter's pamphlet. So this is not a partisan issue. I'm hearing, you know, from Republicans and Democrats, from, you know, liberals and conservatives, that they want to have a voter's pamphlet. So I, you know, support the idea of it, but this was something that was traditionally provided through the state in a lot of ways. And what's happened over the years is we have been delegated this mandate to run elections, but our funding from the state has not kept up with that authority. And this is a extremely intensive, labor-intensive task to put a voter's pamphlet together. You know, I'm concerned that if we do decide to do one now, it's late, haphazard, and I understand Commissioner Trieger's frustration around that. I would love to have one this time because I'm hearing from all sides that they would like to have voters pamphlets. I do think we need to have a longer discussion about either a legislative effort through the state to get funding for county voter pamphlets, and so we can have the staff and time necessary to put these together. But you know, because we're running the elections not for Lane County, you know, we're running them for districts. The only measure on that ballot really that's there, you know, for us is the law enforcement district that we'll end up, you know, being in charge of. You know, so that's you know, one out of, you know, the four, plus the 90 some candidates, which actually is 90 today. It's going to be more probably by the time deadline comes up. You know, those are all for districts. And I will note that I ran for and served on a school board and have run in odd year elections, and I understand the importance of voter pamphlets. So I'm not making decisions about something I haven't had to do. But this is a really tough one for me because I would really love to have a voter's pamphlet this year. I just don't know if we physically can get it done and do it any justice. So that's a concern of mine. But I do think in the long term, we need to make a significant effort to gain the funding and resources necessary to have voter pamphlets in these off-year elections. You know, we're not allowed to charge the districts, you know, necessarily for that pamphlet. You know, it's their candidates. The fees that are established through state law that we're allowed to charge for voter pamphlet statements from the candidates don't cover the cost to produce and mail a voter's pamphlet statement. So we are absorbing that cost internally, and elections is purely a general fund department. So, you know, that's the rub of all this is, you know, basically the state keeps defunding mandated services that counties are providing. And this is just one example of that. Motor voters increase in our voter rolls. It was not funded at the level it should have been funded. You know, so elections continually gets to be underfunded by the state, but the mandate that we're supposed to cover continues to expand. So that is a long-term issue we need to work on. But in the short term, I'm torn about supporting moving ahead because I just don't know if we can do it well, but I do really wish we could have one for this election.
Are there any other commissioners that want to weigh in on this? Well, I'll reserve Commissioner Trieger. I see your hand up again.
And I see I have ink. My pen exploded. Apparently, there's ink all over my head.
Oh, thank you for pointing that out. We wouldn't have noticed.
I appreciate Commissioner Bozovich's comments. And, you know, I want to just stress too, these odd year elections are actually nonpartisan. So I think he's talking about who he's hearing from, but I think it's really important that we remember that. I understand the concerns about state funding or not. This is why my second ask that I haven't made yet is for us to look at more of these structural challenges to institutionalizing doing such a thing, because I think there are challenges, as Mr. Mokrzycki has pointed out, around timing and staffing capacity. It's not only a funding issue, so it's a bigger issue for us as an organization and a way to demonstrate our commitment to good democracy and good democratic principles. So, you know, hearing those very specific timeline issues just spelled out for us also gives me great pause about the ability to do this in a way that with the integrity and the quality that the voters deserve and that the candidates and that the measures deserve. So, you know, I'm open to hearing more from staff or a recommendation. And at some point, at the appropriate point, I still do want to make my very specific agenda request for that other.
Commissioner Trieger, with your permission, if I hear where you're going, and your second ask relates to structurally creating a permanent fix for this, and given the comments I've heard from commissioners, if everyone's okay, why don't you make that ask now? It might be easier for us to come to some resolution, and then we could get back to the here and now, if that would be okay with you.
Thank you, Chair. That's great. So my other future board assignment request then is that we explore how best to arrive at a sustainable solution that, as I said, results in us institutionalizing the practice of producing a voter pamphlet for every cycle. This, you know, would include the budget and role of special districts, issues and cost sharing, the timelines, staffing capacity challenges, anything else that we need to consider to work effectively with our administration, with elections staff. You know, I think we need to do this within the next 6 months or so that we don't again set ourselves up, because depending what staff presents to us as these structural challenges, it could take a while to do the fixes. But I do think, you know, statute, code, and so on are part of these challenges. So I think if the sooner we begin to address this year, the more likely we will be to knock down these barriers and not have to relitigate and frankly spend resource and time on this issue every 2 years, or however often community gets in touch with us about it. We've managed to produce a off-year pamphlet, my understanding is 3 times, and each time it was a reactive process. And so my request is that we, and again, as the newest member, I'm looking to our administrator to help me understand, am I asking for a work session? I think I am, to start to unpack and explore this to move us toward addressing these structural problems.
And Chair, I just would offer that we actually do have an open assignment. So on February 9th, the board directed that we ask, and so it's an open assignment that our legislative committee and Mr. Kyler and Ms. Betcher are taking the lead on, which is to look at this long-term and agree completely that we've done a few of these kind of last-minute voter pamphlets in the last years. And so there is this kind of, you know, this longer-term issue that needs to get resolved, really based on what the board's policy is, and the board's policy should be informed by an understanding of the process and the cost and all those things. So we have an open assignment to look both at the funding, and the discussion from the board originally was Commissioner Buck who asked to look at the funding to produce a voter's pamphlet. Commissioner Trieger then talked about that it's not just funding, but also the process and staff and other issues that need to be addressed. So that assignment has been made. If you want to provide further clarification to that, you certainly can, but I think we already have the the board direction to say, let's look at this longer term issue and let's come up with some options and recommendations for the board that you can implement so this isn't an ongoing challenge in the future.
Commissioner Buck.
Thank you for bringing that up, Ms. Markowski. I would be open to expanding that to encompass everything that Commissioner Traeger just stated, because originally it was specific to the legislative committee, but we as a body could expand that more to a work session so that we can all discuss all the elements in addition to funding.
When Commissioner Traeger was, thank you, Commissioner Buck. When Commissioner Traeger stated that, I saw thumbs up from virtually all commissioners. So as it relates to this second ask, because I also want to weigh in on the first, but as it relates to this second ask, speaking only for myself, not only would I like to see that board assignment followed up on, and a date where it comes back as a work session or however it does before the board. But I want to do that, at least with this body understanding, that my desire and commitment is that this never happen again. So we're not just looking at it, but we're figuring out a way to structure in a permanent fix so that at the last second, when it causes more problems than it's worth it, even though it's worth all the problems it conceivably could cause, we just aren't in this position again. I did not know until this, because Commissioner Buck and I were confronted by this the very first month or two that we were commissioners, as is Commissioner Traeger now. And we didn't understand. And it wasn't until this was brought back right now that I realized this is broken. We need a permanent fix. This should not be a controversial issue. And let's get that assignment taken care of, is my opinion. Other commissioners on this one? I saw thumbs up, but.
Yeah, I heard, so certainly welcome other thoughts, but I heard thumbs up, and what I'll do in the review of assignments is just note that we're going to take the existing item and expand that current assignment to look at all of our options, that we will do a work session with the board where staff will bring forward options for you to consider for both funding and both funding and creating a voter's pamphlet for elections in the future.
Thank you. Raise a hand if you would like to weigh in again on this. Otherwise, let's go back to Commissioner Traeger's first request. Commissioner, what I heard was, as you heard what Mr. Mokrahajski lined out, was both a sense of frustration because this could have been avoided, and there's lots of places to point those fingers, and a sense of resignation, but correct me if I'm wrong, that the logistics might preclude pushing it forward at this time, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think, I will amend my ask instead of saying for next week, since clearly that's not a practical timeline. I guess I'd like to hear maybe a restating and a recommendation from our administrator as to how we proceed and whether there is any path forward to producing a pamphlet or if there is any kind of substitute that we're able to offer the public, indicating to voters that, there are several candidates and ballot measures for them to consider. I don't know, feels to me, well, I'll just stop there and ask for a recap and a recommendation, if that's not putting you too much on the spot in the moment, Mr. Mokrahajski.
I would say, we, in the past, we have done information guides. I think it's called an information guide. It's not a full-blown, it doesn't have the same statutory requirements as a voter pamphlet. I don't know the timeline and what off the top of my head, the timeline and the process that we have implemented before. So I would say, I think that is another alternative option that the county or other taxing districts have deployed in the past. Again, in terms of the voter pamphlet, if you want to do that, what we're saying is we can't. There's just no. I mean, it would. I don't know how we would do it if we wait till next week. So what would have to happen, in my opinion, is you have a board meeting today. You make a decision today. You continue the meeting until tomorrow. You make a decision tomorrow. You direct staff and you both have to direct staff to produce the voter pamphlet, as well as to appoint the committees for the 2 county measures. So you'd actually have to take action to appoint members, and there's code language around not less than 3, not more than 5 persons to write an explanatory statement that is an impartial, simple, and understandable statement explaining the measure and its effect, and then it goes on about the details of what has to be produced. So that would have to be done sooner rather than later so that we can then create that group, have them meet, have them write the explanatory statement. We also would have to reach out to the districts that are doing those. And then we would begin the process to reach out to the candidates. So yeah, that's basically, I mean, I guess or you schedule an emergency meeting for some other time this week. I think our point is just, when I met with the clerk this morning, and I was not aware that this was what was going to transpire, where this was going. Had conversations with the clerk this morning about there may be some questions about a voter pamphlet, what's the timeline and process, and we pulled together all of this because the board is not to write. This issue came up previously. You said, let's look into the long-term thing, but didn't provide any direction related to this cycle. So I just want to provide, that's sort of why we're always going to be responsive. And at the end of the day, it's always the board's call. We'll do whatever you direct us to do, but there are practical constraints, statutory code requirements that, the longer we wait, the longer we get boxed into this timeline. So I think that's what I would say is if you're going to do a voter pamphlet, and I would say even if you're going to do an information guide, we can provide, if you give me some time here this morning, I can dig up some additional information, figure out what that would be, and report back to you. Probably would want a decision here in the next couple of days by the board on either of those. And and then we can go from there.
I saw Commissioner Buck had her hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about maybe not a full-blown voters pamphlet, but an alternative such as an online voter guide where measures and candidates can put in information for people to view as an alternative for this year, given the timeline issues that we have. Is that a possibility?
Mr. Mokrajewski, I believe that's directed at you.
So you're asking about the information guide?
An online one that we could provide to the community that has both measures and candidates and things that are not as structured as a voter's pamphlet, but provide some information to the public.
And Steve, if I could add on to that, only with Commissioner Butts, that don't have so many statutory requirements and impositions given where we're at now, I think.
Right. Yeah, I think I'd ask just for a little bit of time, maybe we're going to do an exec session. So I'm happy to work with our clerk to pull together some. It is my understanding that the sheriff's office is doing an information guide related to the public safety district. So that is an option that's available that, it just, as you've indicated, it doesn't have the same statutory requirements and it's not as all encompassing. And I think clearly that's why many people favor a voter pamphlet, because it gives this kind of broad access to everyone has sort of equal access and opportunity, as opposed to certain measures or candidates being able to purchase those individually. So without kind of getting into more detail to answer your specific question, Commissioner Buck, I guess I'd ask just for a little bit of time to research that. And I'm happy to do that today and get back to you later this morning or this afternoon.
I'm not trying to wrap anything up because it's not wrapped up, but just a thought that I want to run by commissioners. If we recess this meeting and in 10 or so minutes go into executive session, unless you'd like to do that after lunch, we then could reconvene later this afternoon, and perhaps, Steve, you could have the information that you're looking for to answer Commissioner Buck's question. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Commissioner Bozovich.
I'd be fine with that as long as we come back to agenda team requests, because I have a completely separate item to talk about.
And I know Commissioner Farr does too. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. That would be fine with me. And I just want to make sure I have a chance to acknowledge how much I appreciate the scramble that this has put staff in. I think particularly given all the agenda items up till this point in our meeting this morning and talking about workload, urgency, the crises that we're facing around COVID, around wildfire recovery, around the economic strains on folks in our community. This is one election cycle out of many. I am far more interested in and committed to addressing this in the long term, given that we've produced 3 in all of time in these off cycles. I just want to put that perspective and context. I know it feels like the most important thing to anyone who might be on the ballot this spring, but as a commissioner, I have to take that broad look at the overall community needs and benefit for the long term. But so I'm really wrestling with what to do about this May is what I'm saying, and would appreciate a little bit of time to sort my thoughts. But I didn't want to let any more time go by without acknowledging and appreciating the position that this puts staff in, and that I'm also really wanting to consider what we can do to support them. Thank you.
Thank you. I noticed that before we go to other commissioners with other board assignment requests, I noticed that Mr. Rickoff and Ms. Betchart are here, and I didn't know if they wanted to inform this discussion at this time or not.
Chair Bernie, commissioners, if I may, just very quickly, and then I'll turn it over to the county clerk. Just to inform your thinking, please know that there are, at this point, 111 candidates for 199 openings. 199 openings, 6 are contested at this point. Those are 3 school board races in 4J and 1 school board race in Junction City. And now there's still a little time, but in terms of a tool to help folks discern differences, it really is the 4 measures and those 6 races where there is robust and active choice. And I don't know if that might help or hinder any decision making. County Clerk Cheryl Betchart, do you have anything you'd like to add at this point?
Yes, Chair Bernie, commissioners, I just wanted to mention that there has been a voter's guide twice in the last 30 years, and that's typically prepared because it only includes the measures, and that has been the advantage. There are no candidates that are included typically in a voter's guide, so that's why it's been an advantage. That's why the sheriff has been going that route for the Mohawk formation. And then as far as something online goes, all the candidate filings, which includes everything that's required for the optional voters pamphlet, is already put on our webpage for access by the public. So it's a scan of the candidate filing form. That is the information that is required to go into a voter's pamphlet. What you sometimes see in the voter's pamphlet, again, that's optional, it's not required, is that a candidate has endorsements. That piece is not included on the candidate filing form. So just to give you some additional information as far as the differences in what is included currently.
So Ms. Betchart, if I hear you correctly, that information, if it were communicated far and wide through different groups to that link, people could in fact look at that information in considering their voting choices. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are there any commissioners that would like to either make a statement or ask Mr. Rickhoff or Ms. Betchart any further questions on this issue? Seeing none, I think what we do now is we move on, and after we've recessed from this board meeting and after our executive committee meeting, we reconvene to see if there's any addition, unless there's no additional information needed at this point. And actually, Commissioner Trieger, I would request you direct what you would prefer to see moving forward today on this issue.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think if I'm understanding it, the request was, we got the head nods for the request to have staff bring to this full body rather than have it live with the legislative committee looking at a long-term fix, having a work session. Am I on part A? Yes?
We're gonna fix this thing long-term. It'll be your legacy, Commissioner.
Part B then, as far as what we want to do about May 2021, I think the last thing I heard, which sounded good to me, was we could all use a break, some time to consider the information that we've been given, the practicalities of the possibility of doing such a thing, as well as that it would give our administrator some time to look into whether there is an option for any kind of online, with a little more robustness than those candidate filing forms that our clerk just referenced, as a sort of middle ground opportunity. That we weren't clear whether we have the option of putting together some kind of, whether it's a link to a web page or something where candidates can upload a little more information. Because while those candidate filings to the letter have, sort of name, rank, and serial kind of information, they don't have only or exactly what would go in a voter pamphlet, with the understood exception of a statement and endorsements. There's a little more there. So that was my understanding, that we were agreeing to maybe take a bit to put this on pause, take a break, do executive session, then come back and hear if there was any more information about any kind of middle ground or other option to a voter pamphlet, including an online resource.
I was going to call on you, Commissioner Bozovich, as it related to moving on with other requests, unless you want to speak to what Commissioner Trieger just stated.
I just have one more informational request when we come back this afternoon is can the board delegate the appointment of the explanatory statement committees to a staffer? Or do we have to do that by board action? Because I think those explanatory statements have to be written by a committee that contains somebody for, somebody against, and neutral. And I don't think we've got that list in front of us right now. So we'd have to actually be able to delegate that maybe to Mr. Rickhoff or Ms. Betchart. And I want to understand, do we have that legal authority? So that's a question to be answered this afternoon.
Well, so much for not meeting this afternoon. Let's do that, which, Diana, means we're going to reconvene from executive committee to get those links out. Are there any?
Commissioner Burney, this is Diana. All of you should now have links to an afternoon meeting.
Thank you very much. You are awesome. Thank you. Are there other commissioners under 9B with future board assignment requests? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Burnell. I'll mention that Human Services Commission Executive Committee meets at noon today. I guess the chair will not be at that meeting. I have in front of me two resolutions, one prepared by the groups in the community, one prepared by the Public Health Advisory Committee. Because of time, and with apologies to both of these, the preparers of both of these resolutions, I am going to move my agenda team request to next week. So I'm not going to do it in 1 or 2 or 3 minutes. This is a lengthy request. I'll do that next week.
Okay.
By the way, that is regarding a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. That will be next week.
Well, Commissioner Farr, you mentioned this last week. you're very kind to wait again until next week, but thank you very much, sir. Let's not, I don't think
boiling for about 200 years on this side of the Atlantic. I think it deserves due diligence. Look it up.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other future board assignment requests? Commissioner Bozievich, yeah, I thought your hand was up.
Thank you. Unfortunately, mine's time sensitive. I don't know if folks are aware, we just announced Southwest Airlines is going to open operations at Eugene Airport. Unfortunately, at the same time, Lane Community College is considering cutting their aviation school at the airport. That accounts for 40% of our landings and takeoffs at the airport. This is an extremely critical issue because it's what helps qualify that airport to a status at a higher level under FAA standards than it really is, and gives us a whole lot more flight control status as far as in-person flight controllers, et cetera. And if we lose that school out there in those takeoff and landings, it could endanger our ability to service, Southwest Airlines and even some of our current services there, which is really critical to our tourism industry, which has suffered greatly under COVID. This school is scheduled to terminate this school year, this budget year, at the end of June, and just teach out whoever's currently in the program. So that this has to be addressed relatively quickly. I'd like to ask for us to get staff to put together a joint elected officials meeting with the city of Eugene and us, possibly even the city of Springfield and the LCC board to discuss this and possible solutions and funding. This may be a place where we look for some of those COVID relief funds from the federal government to backfill, because it definitely impacts an industry that's been heavily harmed by COVID. But we need to address this. It was an issue that was a problem when I was on LCC's board between 2003 and 2007 of trying to keep that program alive. And we managed to keep it alive back then for just that reason, the economic impact it has to the entire region. And this is not just Lane County, Douglas County, Lynn County, and Benton County are all impacted by those airport operations. So we really need to take a look at this. It's time sensitive. It's very important. And it's one of those crossroads of, one of the few times where the county needs to kind of get involved in an education system in some ways, just on a pure economic development standpoint. So I would request 3 head nods to direct staff to try and set up that work session as soon as possible.
Commissioner Buck.
I definitely have heard about the same issue, but I do have a clarifying question. Given the timing issue that we have, and they're going through their budget process as we are here shortly, I'm not entirely sure how quickly we can get so many bodies together for a meeting. Initially, it seems like we could at least put a letter together to LCC's budget team and or board, at least expressing our support of the program, and that we don't want to see it cut. But I am just a little bit concerned that we won't be able to get all these groups together in a meeting in a timely manner. I just wanted to add that.
So it sounds as if Commissioner Buck is in agreement, but is concerned about the logistics. Mr. Mokrahajski, can you respond to that at all? I don't know what the logistics are. And actually, I was going to ask Commissioner Bozievich to amend his request so it did, in fact, include the city of Springfield.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the logistics of scheduling a joint elected official between the Board of Commissioners and the City of Eugene Council takes quite a bit. So yeah, there will be pretty significant logistical and timeline constraints to having 3 governmental bodies and well, 4 governmental bodies come together. But you can direct us to do whatever you'd like, and we'll do the best we can to get it done in the quickest timeline possible.
Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this issue has been brought to my attention as well. It's a great concern, but it's well beyond. This is really a regional concern. This impacts the cities that surround us that are serviced by our airport. It affects the university. It's much larger than us. I think a letter of support is in order. I spoke with City Councilor Greg Evans about this yesterday, and I understand that LCC, and I think appropriately, is working hard with our congressional representative, with Congressman DeFazio. This seems to me to be a much bigger picture, further up the chain transportation issue, and again, a regional issue. And so I would absolutely support us writing a letter, but I agree the timing of pulling the group together, if it's thought that that group is going to come to some decision to fund and rescue the program, might not yield the result that LCC needs, and not the best use of time in the interim.
Commissioner Bozievich.
So I'll amend my request. I would still like to see eventually a joint elected officials with this as a topic, because I think it's an important topic that we need to discuss and find a permanent solution to the subsidy that school needs. Because the thing about it is the flight school doesn't pay for itself through tuition, and it has to be subsidized. But the impact of that for our region is great. So we got to figure out, is it fair for LCC to be subsidizing that? Should it come from somewhere else? And that's a longer term discussion. And I think we need to continue that. In the short term, I would encourage, authorizing staff to put together a letter for the board to approve, maybe under consent calendar next week or the following week, of support for the program to LCC. Copy that to our federal delegation would be great. But in addition to that, I would also maybe have staff take a look at our ability to, and sources of possible short-term funding. It's a $2 million gap they're trying to fill right now to be able to continue the program past this budget year. So that's kind of, at least that's what I'm hearing. Whether we can fill part of that, get them to, just a letter of support isn't bringing them $2 million. So we need to start thinking about, is there a strategy to get that money to them before June 30th?
They're better at passing bond issues than we are. I'm sorry. I see your hand, Commissioner Krieger, but before I call on you, I'm sorry. Are there any other commissioners that would like to weigh in on this? Commissioner Krieger.
Thank you. Just a clarification. The number I heard was half that. It was a 1 million, and a million here, a million there. Pretty soon it starts to add up, right? I think we just need some clarification on that.
So, yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, did I interrupt you, Commissioner? The first million adds up for me. I fail to see why Commissioner Bozievich's desire for head nods, or at least direction, to at some point, doesn't have to be soon, at some point have a joint meeting on this issue, including the city of Springfield, please. And at the same time, right now, getting a letter from this county board of commissioners, getting it wherever it needs to be, supporting continuation of the program. Having said that, do any commissioners have any objection? Commissioner Dingle.
Chair, I listened to what Commissioner Bozievich asked about, so I wanted to let the board know what the response was to his question about whether or not the board could delegate to somebody else the responsibility for appointing the committee. I'm sorry, Steve. We're not on that right now. Sorry.
That's okay. We need to finish this. So is there consensus on Commissioner Bozovich's request? Okay, I see 3 plus mine thumbs up. So, and Lori, Commissioner Krieger's too. Okay, so that's an assignment. Thank you, Mr. Dingle. I'm sorry. I just wanted to get closure on that. Yes, sir.
So I did look up the lane code provision. It is lane code 2.630 sub 1, which requires that it states the board shall appoint a committee of not less than 3 nor more than 5. And I'm looking through here, I don't see any place where there's a discretion. So I would say the plain reading of it is the board has to appoint the committee. I would also point out that there's just appointing the other part that wasn't mentioned that I'd forgotten about is there's a 5-day challenge period required after they write their statements. So after the committee finishes its work, by statute, there's a 5-day period to challenge it. I want to make sure the board was aware of that.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Farr has a Human Services Commission meeting at noon. Is that correct, Commissioner?
I've already stated I will not be at that. I have more meetings, assuming that we didn't have a meeting this afternoon.
Okay, I was going to, yeah, I thought so too. I'm going to have to make some changes. Is it all right with commissioners if we take, I'm sorry, Commissioner Buck?
I wanted to remove 2 items from our future board assignment requests, if we could do that. These 2 items were made last year, in February of last year, by Commissioner Sorensen regarding the United Front agenda. They were before COVID hit, and they don't, United Front's gonna be online, it's gonna be very different this year. And I don't think that these 2 items are relevant for us at this point. And so I was going to ask the group if you're interested in removing those 2 particular assignments at this point. I can read them if necessary.
I see Commissioner Bozovich and I both gave a thumbs up. Yeah, I see Commissioner Krieger shaking her hand. Good. So you can read them if you'd like, but I think we agree with you. It's moot now.
Thank you. That's all I had for the last of the assignment request item.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Buck. Anything else before we go into recess before executive committee? Well, actually, there's review of assignments. Do you want to do that now, Steve?
No. I'll wait till this afternoon.
Okay. Would commissioners like to take a lunch break and begin executive session at 1 o'clock? Oh, see, I thought I was helping you out, Commissioner Farr. What is the will of the board? I'm going to need to take some time, but it doesn't have to be an hour. 10 minutes? Power through? It is 11:53. Let us enter executive session at 12:10, 15 minutes from now, if that is okay with the rest of the board. We are recessed. I'll see you in 15.
Commissioner Burney, Chair
Yes.
Burney, we need to read into exec session.
Didn't this happen last week? I'm so sorry. Please, Diana, read us in.
The Board of County Commissioners will now meet in executive session to consult with counsel regarding the rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed, and to discuss public records or information, the disclosure of which is prohibited or restricted or otherwise made confidential or privileged under Oregon law. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660-2H, ORS 192.3559A, and ORS 40.225, lawyer-client privilege, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives the news media, and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back into public session should the need arise.
Thank you very much. We are now recessed. We will meet in 15 minutes at 12:10 in executive session. Thank you.